TBARTA February board meeting. We're at PSTA board conference room, and the time is now 9:35. Mayor, will you join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, or lead us, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Call the roll, please.
Chairman Wilson.
Present.
Melanie Griffin. Cliff Manuel is excused. Commissioner John Minton.
Present.
Commissioner Pat Kemp is excused. Commissioner Reggie Bellamy.
Present.
Commissioner Catherine Starkey. Commissioner Karen Seal.
Present.
Rich McCain.
Present.
Commissioner Janet Long.
Present, and just for the record, Commissioner Starkey said she would be here. She's on her way. She's almost here.
Mayor Rick Kreisman.
Here.
And Mayor Bob Buckhorn is excused. Secretary David Wynn.
Present.
And filling in for Mandan.
I'm John Kubler, Director of Transportation Development for District 1.
Do we have a quorum? Okay, thank you. Next item of business is public comment. I do not have any public comment cards. For the audience, if anyone wishes to make public comment, please turn in a card and we can do that now. Okay, none being heard, I'll close public comment. We'll now move to item 4, which is the consent agenda item. Prior minutes, are there any corrections or additions to the minutes?
Move approval, Mr. Chair.
It's been a motion, a second, any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. The ayes have it, minutes carry. The next item of business is the presentation and/or action items. And I will recognize Commissioner Janet Long for the GSA solicitation.
Oh, aren't we going to do the Finance Committee report?
Well, yeah, that's you, and then we'll go into you have any Finance Committee report?
I do. I have just a couple things to say, if I could do that, please, before Al Burns gets up to speak. And I wanted to make the board aware that TBARTA is now current with all of our bills, and we have paid on older requests for reimbursement totaling about $240,000 from FDOT, so I know you're happy about that, Secretary. And so I'd like to thank our Executive Director, David Green, for reaching out to FDOT to help facilitate this and make it happen. Excuse me. So, as I said, now we are current on all our invoices. We have about $138,000 in the bank as of today. Isn't that great?
That is wonderful.
And our new requests for reimbursement are out to FDOT to bring that balance back up to about $200,000. We're making progress. So the committee reviewed and discussed in a detail and approved the following items on our action agenda when we met. Our general services contract with GSS, with WSP and Valerian Group. Based on our discussions, many of the key contractors in the region are part of the VSP contract. So, hence, we approved both of them. And the president of the Valerian Group said she'd be in attendance today and that she was fine with this arrangement. That's the DBE firm. And I think I see them over there. Nice to see you again. Thank you for being here. We may or may not have questions for you in just a moment. FKQ advertising website redesign is moving forward. I think we'll all be really happy to hear that. This is exciting to continually keep improving and updating our website as an effort to help educate our citizens and keep us going in the right direction. Thank you, David, for guiding that forward. We're very grateful. Any questions from anyone on anything I just said? All right, well then, without further ado, Al, do you want to come up and discuss our solicitations and your recommendations for award?
for both are, okay. Good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Long, and board members. This morning, I bring before you two contracts, one with WSP and Valerian Group. Recommend approval of two 3-year base term contracts with two 1-year options to WSP USA Incorporated and Valerian Group. Contracts are not to cumulatively exceed $3 million. Recommend authorizing the executive director to exercise the two 1-year optional years.
Any questions for Al? Okay, on this one contract, do I have a motion to
Move approval.
approve?
Move approval.
Second?
Been a motion, a second. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes carried. Thank you, Al.
You're welcome. Also, the second action item is recommend approval of a contract with FKQ Advertising not to exceed $60,000.
Questions for Al? None being
Does
heard.
David have any?
David, any comments? No, sir. None being heard, I'll accept a motion.
Move approval.
Been a motion, a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion carries. Thank you, Al.
Thank you, Mr.
Before getting into the federal lobbying issue here, I wanted to, there's an error in your presentation materials. The Finance Committee did not actually make any substantive recommendation on approval to any of the vendors that are presented. And in fact, the committee voted to hear, given the complexities of lobbying in Washington, especially these days, from each participant or a recipient of the packet. So we're going to do that today in a format very similar to the way that we chose our executive director, David, here, where each team will present, followed by a round of questionings by the board members, and then we'll subsequently have the next presenter and go through that, and then have a general discussion and questions for a motion at that time. So are the participants ready, Al, to present first?
One item first.
Oh, what?
The website redesign.
Oh, I'm sorry, didn't we, the website redesigned, did we?
Yes, sir, that was approved.
That was approved, yeah, okay. Yeah, we did that separately.
Good morning again, Mr. Chair. Just give a little bit of background on this. The solicitation was released in November of last year. Competitive proposals to engage professional a firm. The RFP complied with TBARTA's procurement policies and was posted on the website and Demand Star. We received 6 proposals. As the chair said, this went to committee and it was recommended that we bring the top 3 ranked firms in for presentations. Just to give, and all 3 firms have acknowledged and are here in a staging area, or what I call the green room. What they're going to be presenting on to you this morning, each firm will be given 10 minutes. They will be emphasizing on the firm's experience, their team, approach to TBARTA, and things that may be needed from TBARTA for them to be successful. I've spoken to each team. I've spoken to all 3 teams. After a team presents, they're going to recuse themselves and go back into the staging area while the next one comes up. And then after the 3rd team proposes, at that time, all firms will come back in. If there's discussion from the board, and it's anticipated that a motion will be made for a vote on your top-ranked firm. We just need your top-ranked firm. Myself and staff, we will tally those votes and then give you your recommendation based on the votes. Any questions of me?
Yes.
Al, thank you. Question, did we set a baseline price based on a market survey or anything like that?
Excellent question, Mr. McLean. What staff has done is I've looked at the various lobbying services for the same type of work for the 2 other transit agencies in the region, HART and PSTA. So once the board approves, I'll look to Mr. Zimmet for guidance, but I'm pretty sure that the board will allow me to enter into negotiations, and we'll negotiate that price to where it's fair and reasonable.
Okay, thank you, Al. Any further questions for Al? So we're ready for the first presentation.
Can I just make a comment? Now, could you review for the board the criteria for selection that's in the RFP? You are to be guided by the criteria that was published, so I just want to make sure that it was fresh in your minds before you started the presentation.
Thank you, Alan. The evaluation criteria that guided this solicitation is the firm's approach, their team, and approach to TBARTA. That's what went out in a letter to the firms, and that's in line with the evaluation criterion that was published in the RFP. Is that sufficient, Alan?
Thank you, Al.
At this time, I'd like to bring up Ballard Partners.
I welcome and thank you for coming down and presenting. Could you
Morning.
please state your name to the board?
Good morning. Thank you for having us. My name is Anna Cruz. I manage our Central Florida practice here, and we are based out of Tampa. The bulk of our legislative practice is housed in our Tallahassee office. We are the largest lobbying firm in the state of Florida. We are indeed a bipartisan firm. We have offices all across the state, and Tallahassee is our main office. Jacksonville, Orlando, Tampa, West Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, and Miami, where we practice both municipal and state lobbying as well. Our DC and our Washington practice, we opened that practice in February of 2017, and we are now the 7th highest grossing firm in Washington, DC, out of firms that have been there for well over 40 years. Our relationships in both the state and DC range from our local relationships with many of you here and the Tampa Bay area as well, and also our relationships within the administration that our DC partners will talk to you today. But we really appreciate the opportunity to potentially represent you. You know, we know this area, we live here, we're from here, and it would be an honor to be representing TBARTA. So now I'm going to call up my colleagues, Dan McFall and Rebecca Ben in our DC office.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. My name is Dan McFall. I'm from the Washington, D.C. office of Ballard Partners. Day before yesterday, I was shoveling snow off my sidewalks, and Mr. Chairman, thank you for the double dose of Tampa Bay sunshine today. It's a welcome change. I think today what you will hear from all the firms is the relationships that they have across the Washington, D.C. federal government, including in the United States Congress, in the House and Senate, with the appropriate authorizing and appropriations committees, and with the Department of Transportation. I would expect that all firms of the quality that you have here today would echo those same thoughts, and frankly, candidly, those qualifications are a minimum for what what the board is seeking here. I think what Ballard Partners offers, and where we differ from some of the other partners, is two specific ways. Number one, we're organically a Florida firm. We were the largest firm in the state of Florida, and we grew into Washington, D.C., and have become very successful, as my colleague pointed out up there. So we're a Florida-first firm. Secondly, I would point out that in addition to our relationships with the House and Senate, with the authorizing committees, the appropriations committees, with the Department of Transportation, and with the FTA, we've also got relationships in the administration, in the White House, in the OMB, in the Vice President's office. So not only can we reach into the Congress and provide information and assistance and guidance in promoting projects, we can also do the same thing within the administration. And I think that's what differentiates Ballard Partners from some of the other presentations that you'll hear from some of the equally qualified candidates that are also going to speak to you. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Rebecca Ben.
Thanks, Dan. Good morning. I'm Rebecca Ben, and I would follow up on Dan's comments by saying that we would work with you all and your staff designees to formulate a plan to go after the funding that would help you reach your goals. The US DOT has not released transit funding as quickly as a lot of folks would like across the country. And what we could do is really work with our relationships that Dan highlighted in the White House at OMB to make sure to raise the profile of your organization and your project requests to put some leverage, frankly, on the DOT to release those funds quickly. I think that is something that our firm is uniquely positioned to do. We also have, as I'm sure the other candidates you will hear from, great relationships in the Florida congressional delegation, and we will utilize those as well to help, frankly, just drive attention to your organization and your projects. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Good morning, folks. My name is Todd Josko. I'm a partner in the Tampa Bay office of Ballard Partners. And Dan and Rebecca touched on what makes us unique at the federal level. Obviously, everyone has great relationships with the congressional delegation, with the Florida delegation, with the Federal Department of Transportation. You wouldn't have those finalists if they didn't have those relationships. But as Dan said, we have a really an unparalleled ability to walk into the president's office, into the vice president's office. What we differentiate ourselves on in DC is our ability to deliver results on the executive branch. And that's where really the funding opportunities are going to come. And we have really unrivaled relationships at that level. Brian Ballard was instrumental in the president's campaign. Our partner in Jacksonville and our partner in DC now, Susie Wiles, was the campaign manager for Donald Trump here in the state of Florida and spent the initial months after the campaign literally placing top-level executives within the executive branch. So there's really no one at the executive level that we can't go to and get decisions very quickly. But I also want to talk about Florida. As Dan said, that we are a Florida-grown company. And Anna and I are the partners here in the Tampa Bay office. And, we understand transportation challenges because we live here. We go to agency meetings, whether it's HART or PSTA or the MPO meetings. We talk to folks about transportation issues in coffee shops across the Tampa Bay region. And we understand that the political landscape very much affects the success of TBARTA. It's not just about appropriations for projects, but how the roadways or how the railways are built very much affects your future. How HART interacts with TBARTA. These are all things that really affect our ability to successfully lobby in Tallahassee, because as you know, community consensus is very critical when it comes to ranking for funding. So, certainly that's something that I think sets us apart from our competition, is that we're here 365 days of the year in the community, building those relationships and knowing what's really going on. We have our finger on the pulse of the community. So when you look at our local presence, which is unrivaled, and you look at our federal practice, which is definitely unparalleled in terms of the decision maker access that we have, we truly believe that we're the best fit for TBARTA. I think I'll echo my colleagues saying that it would be an honor to represent TBARTA at the federal level. We very much appreciate the opportunity today you have of us.
Thank you, Todd, and appreciate that cogent presentation. What we're going to do is now let each board member give the panel an opportunity to ask questions. So are the DOT folks going to abstain as they did from this? So, Commissioner, I think we'll start. Commissioner Mitten, I think we'll start with you in terms of some questions you may have for these presenters.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that it's in the paperwork, but we haven't had a chance to peruse it. Would you just kind of expound upon the team that you have in place in Washington?
Thank you for the question. So we have 10 professionals in our DC office. I worked for 15 years in the U.S. Senate. I hope that I look younger than that. But I spent a good deal of time working on transportation issues, environmental issues in my career in the Senate. I worked for Senator Thad Cochran from Mississippi in his personal office and also on the Appropriations Committee. So I have long-standing relationships on both sides of the aisle with appropriators, both in the House and the Senate, which would come in, I think, pretty handy for the requests that you all would have for funding that we would need to go before the committees to work with them. So Dan McFall, as you heard from earlier, worked for about 20 years in the Florida delegation in the House of Representatives. So he has a wide breadth of experience on issues. We have Brian Ballard, of course, who's our founder and CEO. We have Sylvester Lucas, who's our managing partner, who was based in Miami for a good 15 years, but previously spent time in Washington, D.C. working on a number of different issues. Todd mentioned Susie Wiles, of course, who's also in our D.C. office, and she has, I mean, honestly, just fantastic contacts across this particular administration that we utilize on a daily basis. We also have Robert Wexler, former congressman from Florida, in our office who helps us on a range of issues that affect our Florida companies who are based here who have federal issues. Robert's just a great resource, frankly, for working with members who are in the House today as well. We also have Mr. James Rubin, who is a former speaker for Madeleine Albright. Now, he mainly focuses on foreign policy issues, but because of his sort of deep experience in democratic politics, he also is helpful for us when we need to meet with certain folks on the Democratic side, because I consider transportation a nonpartisan issue, to be fair. I think we work with and try to develop relationships and develop a case for our clients where we can win with champions on both sides of the aisle. Thank you.
Any further questions? Next.
Thank you, Chair. Could you highlight?
Could you put your speaker
You
on?
gotta hit
please?
your speaker, and then I've gotta hit you there.
Very,
Thanks.
very good. Can you highlight maybe one or two efforts you supported in Florida that were successful?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. We do work with numerous municipalities, in particular around the state, and I'll highlight a couple of those. One of them is the city of Pensacola. We do some work for. We represent them both at the state level and at the federal level. We were able to secure some airport funding from the Triumph Fund to the tune of $56 million this past year. They recently got an additional $10 million from Triumph. We were also able to get a grant from the Department of Commerce for the airport project for $13 million. That was just recently announced. We've had similar successes with the Jacksonville Port, JaxPort, up to the north of us. And we also represent the city of Miami Beach. We recently had a success for their school board there. Had a pretty significant grant awarded to them as well. I don't know the exact dollar amount, but I think it was in the millions of dollars range there. And again, I just want to echo my colleague's last statement, Rebecca's last statement about the bipartisan nature of our firm. We emphasized our Florida ties and our administration ties, but we also are a bipartisan firm, and we were just as comfortable reaching out to the right side of the aisle as we are the left side. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mayor.
Thank you, and if I could follow up on, I guess it would be Dan with that, the comment right at the end there. I mean, you mentioned Robert Wexler, or his name was mentioned on the left side of the aisle. Other than him, is there anyone else in Washington that you all have on the team?
So yeah, Jamie Rubin, as Rebecca highlighted. Jamie worked during the Clinton administration. He was the Assistant Secretary of State under Madeleine Albright. So he's got very close ties across the Congress. The Appropriations Chairwoman, I should say, Nita Loewy's from New York. Jamie's from the Manhattan area originally, so he's got relationships there. So we do have some other ties. You know, we've got a relatively efficient shop in Washington, D.C. There were 10 lobbying professionals up there. And, you know, again, 20% of us are on the Democrat side. So we have a fair reach onto both sides. Again, a lot of us operated during our times in government service where we worked equally well with both the Republicans and the Democrats. And as Rebecca said, transportation is not one of those overtly partisan issues, although sometimes it can get partisan. We feel that you know, moving forward for the greater good is neither a Republican nor a Democrat issue, but it's an issue for our community.
I asked the question because I know this is a 3-year agreement with a couple 1-year renewals, and obviously there's an election coming up in a couple of years for the head spot. Your firm clearly has a relationship with the gentleman who now occupies that seat, but if that were to change, the relationship that you all have, you know, the impact of that on a 3-year agreement is, and that's why I'm interested in, you know, to see what your firepower is on the other side, so to speak.
Mr. Mayor, that's a great question and a great point. I thank you for bringing that up. And again, we do have 2 years remaining under this presidency. One of the important things that's going to hopefully be done is getting the infrastructure bill passed. So I think how that is shaped and how that has moved forward is going to be critical to TBARTA and transportation in Florida as a whole. So I agree with you. None of us can predict what's going to happen in 2020. And if you can, I'd love to hear your prediction and share it with some of my clients. But
My predictions aren't very accurate.
yes, sir. Understood. I try to stay away from political predictions, especially this far out. But I would say, yeah, I mean, it's tough to predict what's going to happen in 2020, but I would say we've still got 2 years leading up to that we can affect change and move the needle in favor of funding some projects for TBARTA. So I think that you've got to act on the information that you've got now and the relationships that are existing now, and how do you move the needle at this very moment. And getting out to year 3 and beyond, I think we could certainly adjust our strategies moving forward if necessary. I mean, we're not sure what the makeup of the House and Senate is going to be in 2 years either. But again, we can equally reach into both sides of the aisle, so I think we can accommodate that irrespective of the election results.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Commissioner Long.
Thank you. You can come back up if you want to, because I'm sure you'll want to have a.
They always pick on the tall guy, so.
Well, you're the biggest guy, so hey. I just completed reading your piece here, and it's very impressive.
Thank you, ma'am.
I have to say. And clearly, what leaps out to me is the strength of your organization is very focused on the administration and the relationships you have there, as well as an international base of clients. So while that is incredibly impressive, and I'd love to be one of those people that is traveling around the world and just signing up everybody and anybody, but this board has a mission to be very focused on transit and our region. So my specific question is a piggyback on one of my colleagues here about your work in Florida. And as a former legislator, I'm very familiar with your firm. So my question is, how many transit agencies do you have in your client base from Florida?
That's a great question, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So I'm about to think about that. Maybe my colleague can help me out on what that number is. I don't know off the top of my head. But I go back to the first part of your question, talking about the makeup of our firm and our focus of where our work is. As I mentioned in my early statements, we're a Florida first firm. I'm from Pensacola. I grew up in this area.
And I hear you, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm going to, because my question is, in Florida, I would like to know how many transit agencies you have as clients. Because transportation funding is a very specific, process-driven, you've got to really know your process. And I was impressed with the lady's background, having worked in the Senate. With that said, transit funding doesn't come on a dime, and it's a lengthy process, as we all know who have been to Washington and have been working on the process. So I think I heard, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you opened your Washington firm in 2017, is
That's
that
correct. February of 2017, about 2 years ago.
Okay, thank you. And my biggest concern is it doesn't appear, I could be wrong, and I can change I'm not rigid, just so you know. But you don't seem to have that number on the tip of your tongue, and you're making a presentation to a transit agency. I would think you would be familiar with how many clients you have in Florida.
Well, I have an idea of how many clients we have in Florida. I don't know how many transit.
That are transit agents.
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
All right, well, maybe you can find out before you leave today.
We can get you that answer at a quick turnaround, for sure.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. And to that point, too, I would put the question here that I think we all acknowledge on this board and our presenters that transportation funding is anything but regular. It's disrupted in Washington, D.C. now, as I think the state of California just recently learned. And this organization is not going to be totally dependent on the FDA for its funding, but also because we're leveraging the highway system on the FHA. you know, and potentially then the administration. So can you tell me how you guys can leverage the overall higher-up relationships you have with the Trump administration and Governor DeSantis' administration to go to the top to get potentially funding down? Because again, as we say, nothing is totally predictable and business as usual. And while we might be a transit agency, or one, we're nonetheless looking for the bottom line dollars we can get from Washington. So with that in mind, maybe a discussion on that.
Thank you for the question. So I'll start with the federal level and how we would leverage our contacts in the administration. So step by step, we would sit with you all and your staff, figure out, I know you passed a feasibility plan to figure out which projects you favor, which ones you want to fund. We would work through the FTA, and you're correct, Commissioner Long, that the processes and the guidance for FTA for funding their capital improvement grants are specific. They're transparent, and we can absolutely work through that. So we can work through that on one track. The second, because I like to always tell my clients that I work with that I like to work parallel tracks. We can do more than one thing at a time. So we'll work out the specifics with you, with FTA, and FHWA, if that's appropriate, for whichever projects you want to pursue. We will then we will meet with members of the Florida delegation who are in this area that can be helpful. I can think of, even though the House has changed Democratic control, Mario Diaz-Balart has been a great, great advocate for transit funding in particular. We will work with him. We will work with David Price, who is the Democrat who's in charge of that subcommittee on appropriations. He's Congressman Diaz-Balart's counterpart. We will work with them. That would be track 2. Track 3 is then we would work with, as Dan mentioned, at the outset of his presentation, with our contacts in the White House, in the Domestic Policy Council, in the Vice President's office, in the National Economic Council. There are transportation staffers in those 3 buckets that we would meet with to highlight why these projects are important for Florida. Because Florida, as you all know, I don't have to tell you, is an incredibly important state in this country. So we will work those 3 tracks to push your projects forward.
Thank you. And to that point, too, I just wanted to clarify, too, I know that your partner, Susie Wiles, represented the president here in Florida. It's my understanding, too, that she ran the governor's campaign this past cycle.
She did. And so I would say I'm not, my colleagues, Anna and Todd, are the local folks and have sort of the depth of knowledge about Florida specifics, whereas I have the depth of knowledge at the federal level. And that's why I think we would work together with Susie to work with the contacts in the DeSantis administration now to also highlight what's important to you in Florida. I mean, that's sort of, we work, what I really enjoy about this firm is while I might be your lead person for TBARTA's issue, we work as a team. We're collaborative. There are no sharp elbows in our office. I will run down to Dan's office or Susie's office every day. Hey, can you help me with this? Do you know somebody in this office? I know you're strong there. We work together, and we also keep each other abreast of the issues that are important to our clients as you do, right? You're out in the community, we're out in DC working on the Hill. We might run into folks where we can say, oh, I know Dan was working on this issue. By the way, remember this is important, and he would do for me with TBARTA if he is in the Florida delegation office where it's important to you. So we are a nimble team, but we manage to cover a lot of ground that way.
Thank you. Melanie, welcome.
Thank
Sorry
you.
we're late. As you can see, we're going around questioning here, and sorry you could not make the entire presentation, but do you have some questions?
I don't. Thank you.
Commissioner Starkey?
I think Commissioner Long and others have really put forth questions that I would have had, so I don't want to repeat the same questions. I would say I think it's a very capable firm, and I think we have some great applicants in front of us and a hard decision.
Thank you. Commissioner Seal?
The only question I would have is
Could you hit your button there? Your
Sorry.
button. And
is your price is considerably higher than the rest of the firms. Can you explain why?
I'll take a shot at that because I wanted to just add some other comments to some questions that were answered. In terms of pricing, you know, there's a value of what we feel that we bring to the table. And, you know, I think that this goes back to kind of our abilities and our relationships. The question before was about the DeSantis administration, and as the chairman alluded, that our partner Susie Wiles was the chairman of Governor DeSantis' campaign. Brian Ballard was the chair of the inaugural committee. You know, while we're not being hired potentially for state legislative services, I see Natalie here, and I know that her and Ron do a great job, and we work well with them. But certainly, you know, our relationship with the DeSantis administration is something that we would like to leverage on TBARTA's behalf to show the importance to the president and the executive branch of DC of how important this is to Florida, because that matters. And there's a value to that. To Commissioner Long's question about you know, transit experience, and look, I am not a DC transit expert. I'm a Florida boy, but I do know that there is a very rigid process, and I think that part of our value comes from our ability to transcend that process. And you know, at the end of the day, there's a process, but these decisions are political, and our ability to go to the very top decision makers and escalate these issues beyond that process makes us unique. And I think that that's reflected in our price. So, you know, we're not always the cheapest, but we are always the best. So, thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Reggie.
That's very, very impressive information here. I want to hear more about, you mentioned a community consensus. I want to know from your team perspective, how do you focus on community consensus as relates to transportation, you know, impacting TBARTA? So can someone just help me with that? Can you hear me? Sure.
That was a great question. So I wish that we could offer consensus abilities. I don't know that, you know, that's, I guess, the direction I may have misspoke. I know that the importance of having a unified voice for appropriations acts is important, but the fact that we have a local presence here, full-time, 365 days of the year presence, I think gives us a better understanding of some of the concerns that are out there. And knowing, you know, how this agency feels about this project versus this agency and everything, sometimes those, you know, what the goals are not online. And I think that we can help you navigate those pitfalls along the way. I wish I had a magic wand to make everybody sing on the same page, but you know, certainly, you know, I think that as a resource to the board, you know, we're very involved in the community. We're very involved in discussions, and I think that we would be great counsel to you in terms of what's being said, both, you know, at the various board levels, but also at the grassroots levels too.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, guys. We are going to hear.
I have another question.
Oh, well, we got to somewhat limit the time to open it up. Is it going to be?
It's important.
Okay, all right. Chair recognizes Commissioner Long.
I'm trying to get, I forgot the first gentleman's name. I forgot your name. Dan. I'm trying to get Dan off the hook here. So I get that you don't have the number right now of your clients or transit agencies in Florida, but could you give me an example of a discretionary FTA grant that has been a success story for either you or the young lady or your firm?
I don't have a specific example off the top of my head. I don't specifically have a transit client that I've worked on, so I don't have a.
I just thought maybe you might have a success story that you'd like to talk about with FTA.
We don't have an FTA client in Washington, D.C. right now. You would be our first. We have had success, as Dan mentioned, at for City of Pensacola, and I recently worked with the City of Jacksonville to secure a $12.5 million grant, a build grant, formerly the Tiger program. So we are new naivete to this game. I don't want to mislead you. I just think we have already developed a pattern of success, and we look forward to continuing that.
And I just have one more question that maybe, I'll be quick, Mr. Chair. I thought I heard Todd say that because of your relationships with your key folks in Washington, to include our president, that you could, he used the word transcend the hiccups or whatever that we get from FTA or the Congress. Did they change the process and the Congress does no longer appropriate the dollars?
No, ma'am. No.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure.
Yeah,
'cause
as
I
a
know
former
things-
appropriator, I would never say that.
I just was unclear because, yeah, I
No,
thought.
I think he was alluding to I think Todd was alluding to the fact that while, as I mentioned about the sort of the three-pronged plan, we would obviously work with the House and Senate appropriators and your Florida delegation to request, right, funds for projects, to ask for their support at DOT if you all submit for either an FTA grant or FHWA. And then we would utilize our contacts in the administration to push those forward. It's still a House, Senate, White House, agency battle. It will be, we will work all of those areas.
I just wanted to make sure I.
No,
hadn't missed
absolutely
something.
not. No. My former colleagues would string me up if they heard me say something like that. No, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, just to follow up with that too, it's my understanding that there's not a current FTA administrator, there's an interim one, and the President of the United States will be appointing that new FTA administrator.
Yes, sir, that is correct. So Jane Williams is currently the acting administrator, and she worked for, I want to say, Governor Hogan of Maryland. She has experience there and at WMATA,
We've
DC.
met her several times.
Yeah, she's a lovely person. So she's acting. Thelma Drake was nominated to be the FTA administrator last session of Congress. Unfortunately, her nomination was not agreed to in the Senate. She has been renominated. So I checked in with a couple friends of mine in the Senate before coming down here to see if they had a read on when that might come up again. And there's no specific timeline yet. They hope that there'll be a number of nominations that will come through fairly quickly here in the next month or so.
And to my understanding too, both the President and Speaker Pelosi and Senator Schumer have indicated that the transportation is one field where hopefully they can all get together in the next 2 years.
Yes, sir.
So it's fair to say that you've got the Hill and the presidency working on that, and most likely, if they want to do something, the agencies will follow suit. Is that a
Yes, sir.
fair statement?
Yeah, I just want to echo my comments. I don't, and I think most people in DC don't see transportation as a partisan issue. It's one of, frankly, the last remaining issues where folks on both sides of the aisle can work together, because we all agree that transit, that fixing potholes, right, that building new roads is important for cities and states all over the country.
Great. Thanks. Any other questions? Thanks so much.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
the next group that's going to be, the next firm that's going to be coming in is Chambers. They have a handout and that's going to be passed out to you.
Mr. Chairman, while we're waiting for the next speaker.
Yes, Commissioner Stark.
I was on a call this week with the White House discussing infrastructure, and they are certainly saying that they're expecting local contributions. So we just really need to be on our game, and I think we have a great opportunity.
I concur with that and appreciate your comments on that.
They seem very positive that something was going to get done. So.
Good. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Can you please identify yourselves for the board?
Good morning. We are Chambers, Conlon, and Hartwell, LLC. I'm Katie Catchell, partner.
I'm Mara Stragal-Kala. I'm a senior associate.
Richard Sherman, senior associate.
Thank you. What we're going to do as a format is allow you to make a presentation, and you can take, a reasonable amount of time, and then each member of the board will then ask a specific question, for you guys to respond to in any way we'd like to. So with that said, welcome again, and please proceed with your presentation.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. Chambers, Conlon, and Hartwell, we've been in business for 36 years. We are a Washington, D.C. federal registered lobbying firm. Our Capitol Hill office is a short walk from the House and Senate buildings, as well as the U.S. Department of Transportation. We are a transportation-focused lobbying firm. We represent bus-only transit agencies such as VIA in San Antonio, bus and rail agencies such as Capital Metro in Austin, Texas, and also commuter railroads such as Alaska Railroad and Metrolink in Southern California. Metrolink also happens to be a joint powers authority, one of two joint power authorities that we represent. The other one is TransBay in San Francisco. With all these transit clients, we meet regularly with the FTA, Acting Administrator Jane Williams, and also transit clients include the transit industry, supply industry, transportation trade associations such as the Southwest Transit Association, and also Class 1 railroads, short-line railroads. So we are pretty saturated in the transit and transportation area. The bulk of our business is federal government affairs, AKA lobbying, federal lobbying. We've got intimate knowledge of the legislative process, especially when it involves transportation, appropriations, and authorization. We also provide a robust grant writing service. We've won over $100 million in federal funding for clients in competitive grants like BUILD, CRISI, and CMAQ. We're also experts in federal loan applications. Another branch of our business is offering technical transportation engineering consulting, which gives us a really good background in technical issues such as Buy America. We are embedded in the Washington, D.C. Transportation Insiders Club. We attend regular strategy meetings with lobbyists held by transportation trade associations, including APTA, the Public Transit Association, the Railroad Association, called AAR, and the Port Association, with all the port authorities, AAPA. We also run a trade coalition that brings together labor and management for railroad issues, and that's called One Rail. So given our client base, we are constantly monitoring and reporting on legislative and regulatory activity related to transit and transportation directly. And as part of that work, we're in continual communication with the decision makers on Capitol Hill and DOT. And over many years, that constant contact has allowed us to build strong relationships based on trust and competence. Now for the team, I'm Katie Catchell again. I've been doing government affairs for 15 years, whether working for a United States senator or lobbying. I refer you to the handout for my more background information. I am a federal registered lobbyist, and I do specialize in public transportation and city issues. And all the clients that I work on, I do very, very similar scope of work, if not identical to TBARTA's scope of work. And in the proposal, you would have read about my work helping Capital Metro secure a $37.6 million in CIG FTA funds for a bus rapid transit project. Not with us, but part of the team is Don Norden. He's our firm's senior partner and counsel, and he is our amendment drafting savant. He specializes in the intricate and wonky world of Federal Transit Administration parlance and programs. It can get quite weedy and technical. His efforts resulted in successfully proving that the Alaska Railroad is eligible for FTA formula funding. He's got 3 decades of Washington, D.C. experience working on transportation issues, including having had Florida Tri-Rail as a client. So now I'll pass to Mara.
So, as I said before, I'm Mara Stragal-Kala. I joined CCNH in October of 2018, where I've continued to advocate on behalf of public transportation. I say continue because I came over from APTA, the American Public Transportation Association, where I was a senior legislative representative. I had my hands in a bit of everything there, but I really focused a lot on appropriations, the Capital Investment Grant Program, and commuter rail issues such as positive train control, or PTC. And in that role, I led the interdepartmental team that prepared congressional testimony for our president to give in front of House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee last year. Before I was with APTA, I was with the Senate Appropriations Committee, and before that I was with the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, which is the lead on the surface transportation authorization legislation that funds public transportation, even though public transportation is, jurisdiction is in banking. But during my time on the Hill, I was able to create really strong relationships that are also friendships with a lot of the appropriations staff. So I have an in-depth knowledge not only of the process, but of the people who carry out that process. And those friendships and working relationships have been expanded to the House side during my time at APTA. I was really able to continue those relationships and build on them. So it also became a two-way street. They not only do we go to them for our clients, but they often come to us because we've got our pulse on the public transportation industry. I'm also going to introduce my colleague Matt Bell, who couldn't be here. Matt Bell is engaged with local politics both personally and professionally. He runs our robust grassroots event program, which has allowed him to build a great network of connections with members of Congress, both in DC but also in their districts, and that has allowed us to tap into all these different offices for other clients as well as the ones that he's doing these grassroots events for. He also, and part of running a trade association, he sits on a DOT advisory safety commission. So he's built relationships both on the Hill and in the administration as well.
Good morning. My name's Richard Sherman. I've been at Chambers, Cullen, Hartwell in numerous different roles since 2000. I've done transportation trade association management and government relations, railway business consulting activities around the world, and also have policy analysis experience. My area of focus these days is transportation financing, capital project development assistance, and federal compliance support. And I've helped clients win about $40 million in competitive federal grants through BUILD, CRISI, and CMAQ. And I also do work with the US DOT's RIF loan program.
Thank you, Richard. Approach to TBARTA, we want to get to know you. We've done a ton of research on the publicly available documents, but we know things can change and the human-to-human interactions preferred. We want to establish a communication strategy, integrate as part of your team, dedicate resources to monitor and keep you apprised of activity. Suggest a dual track with an immediate and a long term. The long term would be planting the seeds for deepening the relationships with the Hill and federal agencies, but on the immediate game plan, short term, we'd love to have you come to DC in March for the APTA Legislative Conference, attend some of the sessions, but really have some side meetings with your key committee staff and your delegation and Acting Administrator Jane Williams.
Another thing we'd want to get started on immediately is the appropriations process. You may know fiscal year 2019 just wrapped up, and they're already on to fiscal year 2020. So it's really important that we get in all the requests through your delegation, but also directly to the Appropriations Committee. Also starting to think about your reauthorization priorities, which programs you want to grow, tweak, change, what new ideas are not being currently addressed through current legislation. So we'd want to understand that, because even if the reauthorization doesn't happen until 2020 or beyond, the discussions are happening now, and there's always a chance that an infrastructure initiative could pop up, in which case you want to be ready with suggestions.
So with fiscal year 19 appropriations finally completed, there's a number of competitive grant programs coming up very quickly, including BUILD in less than about 60 days. That's going to open. So if we were hired, we'd look forward to working with you to advise on matching programs to projects, reviewing and commenting on application packages, and of course developing a political stakeholder support strategy. That's really effective. Some of the things we'd be looking for upon executing a contract would be an immediate communications download, working with you to update the legislative strategy and work plan, and working to understand better the legislative and regional priorities, the regional transit feasibility plan, and generally the operating and funding structure of TBARTA and its members.
Thank you, Richard. So Chambers Conlon Hartwell, as a boutique transportation lobbying firm, we provide our clients with a level of attention that we believe is the reason why half our clients have been with us a decade or longer. We are really the infield utility players for transportation and transit in Washington, D.C., and we're happy to present to you today and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that presentation. We're now going to start on this side of the room and go around for a round of questioning. Commissioner Mitten.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to commend the solicitor for the clear and concise and brief presentation, and it's obvious that oral presentations have been done before. Thank you for that. In fact, so good that I don't have questions for me should my colleagues' questions be consistent. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I too want to commend you. Thank you. Good presentation. I might have two questions, very short ones. Have you done any work in the state of Florida or for the state of Florida?
We have. We've represented Florida Tri-Rail several years ago, and my partner, Don Norden, did the bulk of the work on that client. Is there any other project activities you've done?
And was that a successful effort?
I believe so. I mean, I wouldn't know the details, but we can get back to you on, exactly maybe like a case study of what we did for Tri-Rail.
Right, thank you. And just a follow-on question. Contacts within the state of Florida, of course, at the elected levels?
Yeah, I would say that, especially with the Mario Diaz-Balart from the Miami area is now the ranking member of the THUD subcommittee for appropriations. I was in a meeting with him very recently, so we've built a lot of relationships with the appropriators as well. We've met with a lot of those same offices, Castor's office, Chris, through my time at APTA, so we've built those relationships which we could carry over. So while I haven't had any specific clients in Florida, going back to your first question, we've worked with, at APTA, we worked with PSDA, we worked with Miami-Dade, Florida DOT, SFRTA.
And our work with the American Short Line and Regional Railroad Association has put us in virtually every congressional office. If you think about railroads, they run through every congressional district. And we've, worked with teams of, short lines in Florida and going to see the delegation members. So those relationships are there and can be built stronger.
Thank you very much.
Mayor Kreisman.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. Appreciate, in particular, your approach and your plan that you described for things that you're going to be looking for and looking at on our behalf. You've given a list of your team members. I'm assuming, maybe I shouldn't use that word assuming, but that these are the folks listed here are the primary folks that would be we would be working with. But does your is your overall team of the organization larger than this, or?
Yes, sir. We've got 14 folks on staff, and with a small business, everybody works on every client.
Okay. And then the second question, and actually my last question, most likely, depending on the answer, is several of you have indicated that you are former U.S. Senate staffers. Would you share with us who the staffers that you work, or who the senators that you all work with?
We'll make it easy for you because we worked for the same one many years apart. But I worked for U.S. Senator Barbara Mikulski from Maryland.
And I worked for her committee, the Appropriations Committee. So I was under her jurisdiction, but we worked really closely on both sides of the aisle. And I also worked with the Environment and Public Works Committee under, at the time, Chairman Boxer. And again, we worked on MAP 21, which isn't always popular in public transportation circles, but it did allow me to build those relationships again across the aisle at the committee level. And Don Norden worked for, I believe it's in...
Senator from Nebraska in the early 90s, Jim Exon.
On the Commerce Committee.
And on the Commerce Committee.
Thank you. Thank you. Commissioner Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You've answered all of the questions that I would have asked you, and I am very impressed with your depth on the transit particular focus, and tickled that you have a big client in Florida. So, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I have a couple of questions, too. One, as you probably know from reading the TBARTA plan, that we are leveraging the interstate system here. So in addition to the normal work you would be doing with the FDA, there has to be some interaction with FHA. In fact, as you probably heard, the West Shore project is one of our main priorities because that is the bottleneck going into Tampa from Pinellas County. Can you describe briefly any interaction you've had with FHA or the Hill with respect to that, as opposed from just pure transit grant projects?
Yeah, so EPW, where I used to work, the Senate Committee actually is in charge of, they have jurisdiction over the highway funding system. And through that, but also actually through some of our transit work, we've interacted with FHWA a lot more on AV side, but that's an area where we could branch out more. On the Senate side, it's kind of funny. Everyone has a little bit of a piece of the transportation jurisdiction. On the House side, it's just T&I, and the Highways and Transit is in the same subcommittee even. So we've built relationships with that staff. David Napoliello, who is a staffer who was both at EPW while I was there and is now Highways and Transit subcommittee staff, leading the charge on that. And he's known as kind of a wizard on the Highway Trust Fund, and so that's a good contact that we definitely have in that world.
Great. And one final question is, I think, very commendable resume that you all have in terms of your representation of transit clients. To an extent, that could be a double-edged sword in that many as you have nationwide clients all competing for regrettably limited federal dollars for some important transit projects. Do you see that you can give TBARTA the specialized attention that we hope we can get from Washington lobbyists, not to the extent of some other agency in California or Nebraska or wherever?
Yeah, no, I think one great thing about being a smaller firm is that we do give that special attention to all of our clients. We're very careful about who we decide to take on as clients, so we give that personalized attention. Our experience is something that is translated, and we're in the room for all those discussions, and I think that is more beneficial than it is detrimental. And we make sure that we are going to carry out specifically what you need for you. And we found more, it actually allows us to build coalitions more than it is competing with each other. Especially if you're competing against, we can go, since we don't have currently a Florida-specific client in the transit world, we would be able to, leverage relationships with, whether it's with Rubio or New Senator Scott, to get them to support your project specifically within the process.
Thank you. Melanie?
Just two quick follow-up questions from that. One is, have you ever had an instance where you were representing more than one transportation and or transit client and one did not get funding because of the other, in terms of having to make a decision about fighting for one versus the other, prioritizing?
That happens. I have two Texas transit agencies, San Antonio and Austin, and they're pretty close by one another. And Texas in general they're competing against each other. I mean, my philosophy is I love all my children, and I'm pushing hard for all of them. And each one got all the letters of support. Each one got all the phone calls, and each one was lobbied for equally. And one got one, and one didn't. And it might not even be like transit versus transit. I mean, Texas has a lot of other projects too. So, that's how we've handled it. We just treat everyone with the same level of attention and detail.
Yeah. We make sure that you're going to get all of the support that we can possibly get on our end, and we'll work with you to make sure that, the things that aren't necessarily in our control but are in your control are also all the I's are dotted, T's are crossed, because we want to make sure that you're put in the best position to win. And we would do that, yes, for both of our clients if we had that conflict. But a lot of the time it's not always necessarily one is going to win at the detriment of others. It's, there's a whole portfolio of projects that are being considered, and their qualifications, may be different for a project.
And my second question is, and if it's well, I guess so I'll ask it the way I want to ask it, and then give the caveat that if you need to give me a different answer, I understand, is that what, over the next 3 years, what transit and/or transportation federal projects would you be advocating for in addition to TBARTA's project or projects? And my caveat to that is, if you have some type of like confidentiality or non-disclosure, I'd just be looking then for numbers if you couldn't give us the actual like agency names.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to say agency names. I don't.
And I want to be respectful of that.
Yeah,
So I just want to get a
but we do
ballpark of like, are you there representing one people, or not one people, that's not great English, one agency, 5 agencies, 10 agencies?
We have a handful, but some of them have differing projects and types of projects, which would qualify for different types of programs and funding. We do have a couple that are interested in the Capital Investment Grant Program. And while that is a competitive grant program, it's not competitive in the traditional sense where one is competing against another for a pot of money in a given year. It really is you competing against yourself to hit all of the markers and qualify for that funding. And then funding, they've never had a shortage of funding on this. The issue is getting the projects to move through the pipeline properly and have all of their ducks in a row, and then get it to the point in which they're recommended. So those are ones where really you're competing against yourself, not really against others. And if you have all of your ducks in a row and you are a good project, there is funding there. It comes sometimes a bit at a time, sometimes it comes a little bit long, later down the line, but that would be less of an issue, I think, in competing, every year. I think we have some that do build grants as well, or Tiger/Build. We've seen that funding grow exponentially, and I think they're starting to move back towards a little bit more of equitable distribution geographically and by mode. So I think the chances are increasing.
And just one follow-up, I do want to get an answer to that question, though, is approximately how many other agencies will you be representing over the next 3 years? In again, a ballpark. Specifically for transit or transportation?
So I think it's like 5. So we have, so for competitive grant programs that you would also be interested in, probably 5, I think. 4.
Probably
4.
3.
Okay.
3 to 5. That's perfect. Yeah, it's not 20, 50, 80.
Yeah, no, it's like 3 to 5.
3 to 5. Okay, perfect. That's what I wanted to know. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Melanie. Commissioner Starkey.
A couple of questions. One, what is BUILD? I have no idea what that is. You mentioned that, so.
Sure. So BUILD is it's a discretionary program that comes from annual appropriations every year. It's competitive. This year there'll be $900 million. The maximum.
900 million.
900 million available. Maximum grant award is 25 million. And the competition is going to open within the next 60 days per statute. Highly competitive. So they're going to get about 1,000 applications, and they're only going to award, the funds they have available. So it's broadly open to almost any type of surface transportation project. And Congress, after seeing the disproportionate rural-urban split last year, has mandated that it be 50-50. So there's so urban projects will be more competitive in BUILD this year.
This
Tiger program.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's
okay.
The former
Tiger West.
Yeah, and so the funding has grown on that. It's quite beloved by appropriators in particular. It's not an authorized program, but it does get appropriated money every year. It traditionally was about $500 million each year, and then last year it was $1.5 billion, and this year it's $900 million. So they are continuing to keep it at a much higher level than it had been for quite a while.
Excellent. And I'm not sure, well, hopefully you're aware, doing your research, that we are the largest MSA in the country that has not come to Washington with a plan and an ask. And so, and also, we are not allowed to say the word, is it train? Yeah. As of right now, we hope one day that'll change. And as you know, we have, I think, Brightline looking at coming to Tampa. But have you worked on BRT projects in the country?
Yes, I worked on a BRT project for Capital Metro in Austin, Texas, bringing in $37.6 million. It was at a strange time where it was bridging between earmarks and no earmarks, and we were able to secure that money under the earmark scenario and also the no earmark scenario. And it required, a lot of congressional delegation, lobbying, talking to FTA, and really moving that across the finish line.
And moving forward, BRT is quite popular in Congress, particularly among Republicans. See that as a really great investment for public transportation. You get a lot of the development and the economic benefits without having to invest quite as much money in building the T word. So you see a lot of support among Republicans, and so that's an area in which you can really drive a good conversation.
Excellent. Okay, those are my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Seal.
Remember to turn my light on.
No, he.
I got you.
You got me? Okay.
You push first and then I push second.
I agree with the comments made earlier. This is a very nice presentation. So my only question, since everybody's had a chance to ask numerous questions already, of all the projects that you went after for funding, what would you say was your heaviest lift and your most successful one that you might have been even surprised about?
Well, I guess I would go back to the Capital Metro example, because when we were hired, it was during the year where Congress actually deleted funding for them, and we managed to wrangle it back, with just using our tenacity, and, we had just gotten to know the Texas delegation, but we were able to present the case and get that earmark back in.
As I mentioned, I started with CCNH in October, and before that I was with APTA, and so I didn't necessarily have a specific win on a grant, but I think working on the funding levels that public transportation received over the last 2 years, particularly in FY18, fiscal year 18, I was even surprised at how successful we were able to lobby Congress and get those funds, and we were able to see bipartisan support for a lot of programs that hadn't necessarily received bipartisan support in the past. And so building those relationships and getting Republicans and Democrats to kind of hold hands on this, that for me was a huge success, and I enjoyed that lift.
So it sounds like you have a bipartisan approach.
That's the most successful approach.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. No questions? Thank you, folks, for your presentation and good answers to all the questions here. We'll have you go back and wait while we interview the last group. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The last firm that'll be presenting this morning is Van Scoyoc. I think Jennifer is passing out their handouts. Just as a reminder, the evaluation criterion that you'll be asked to give your #1 score for is based on their proposal, the firm's approach, the team, approach to TBARTA. After this firm finishes presenting and you finish with Q&A, Mr. Chair, they'll stay and the others will be invited to come in, and it's anticipated that a motion to vote on your #1 firm, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, just for everyone's information, after the presentation, I'm going to take a 10-minute recess for everyone to use the facilities, and then we'll reconvene 10 minutes thereafter.
Yes, sir.
Morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for letting us be here this morning. Shannon's happy to be out of Washington and in sunny Florida, so thank you for letting her do that. For those who don't know me, my name is Harry Glenn, and I'm a Vice President at Van Scoyoc Associates, and I would serve as our team's lead for this TBARTA project. I'm joined by Shannon Hanna, who will introduce Steve Palmer, who's the third member of our team who couldn't be here this morning. We were asked to give you a quick overview of our firm and our team, to discuss our approach and the support we'll need from TBARTA going forward. We've summarized this information. I think they passed out our handout. So just a little bit about Van Scoyk Associates. Our firm was founded in 1990 and has extensive experience in representing public entities and municipal clients. Steve Palmer and I work together here for PSTA, representing PSTA. In this area, I also work for Pinellas County, Pasco County, City of Clearwater, and Port of Tampa Bay are some of our public clients. We're a bipartisan firm. We think that's very important, that can navigate the changing political climate and the changing makeup of the Congress. Overall, we have 55 professionals of VSA, and in addition to the 3 of us who would work with TBARTA, you'd have access to the other 52 folks who work with us if you have special needs or we need a special relationship or background that may be helpful to you. All of our team are former members of with a senior level experience on Capitol Hill or within federal agencies. On the next page of our handout, we talk about our team members. You'll see that we put together a strong team to support TBARTA. I bring to the team 40 years of living here in Pinellas County and working to support Pinellas County and Tampa Bay area communities. My colleague Steve Palmer has more than 30 years of experience working with us and with the U.S. Department of Transportation and its various agencies that will be important to you and your project. And Shannon Hanna, who will introduce herself in a minute, has a deep working knowledge of federal transit programs and policies, having worked on the Senate Commerce Committee staff and with transportation-related trade associations in Washington. As to my background, I'm one of 25 vice presidents at Van Scoyk Associates, having joined the firm in 2014. Many of you know that I spent 34 years on Capitol Hill working for Congressman Bill Young. I served as his chief of staff for the last 19 years until his passing in 2013. During my service in Congress, I managed a variety of projects for Congressman Young, including many of transportation projects around the county and the Bay Area. And having worked for the former chairman of the Appropriations Committee, I continue to have a deep understanding and relationship with the Appropriations Committees. As a resident of Clearwater, I split my time between here, fortunately, and Washington, D.C. My Florida clients find this to be particularly helpful as I can work with them face-to-face on a regular basis instead of just by telephone. I want to introduce Steve Palmer, who can't be here. Some of you who work with us when PSTA know Steve very well. He unfortunately had a trip scheduled that he'd already booked tickets before this meeting was called, so he apologizes for not being here. Steve is our firm's lead vice president at Van Scoyk Associates on transportation issues. He served as the Assistant Secretary for Government Affairs for 5 years at the U.S. Department of Transportation. And prior to that, he served in the Senate and on the Senate Commerce and Transportation Committee. Shannon's going to talk a little bit later about some of her work with Steve for other transit clients around the country. First, let me introduce Shannon so she can tell you a little bit about herself.
Good morning. For the past 3 years, I've been at Van Scoyk Associates working with Steve Palmer on our transportation clients. Prior to joining VSA, I worked as the senior legislative representative at the American Public Transportation Association, where I worked on funding, finance, and tax issues. I also worked for several years in government affairs for an airport trade association. And prior to my career in government affairs, I spent over 5 years working on surface transportation and rail issues for the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee. As Harry mentioned, our team at VSA has both experience and demonstrated successes working with multimodal public transportation agencies. On behalf of PSTA here in Pinellas County, we've been successful in helping them get 2 low-no emissions grants totaling over $2 million and an FTA sandbox grant for a transit on demand project. In addition, we're working with PSTA to move their BRT project through the Small Starts grant process. Our team has also helped the Dallas Area Rapid Transit, also known as DART, through the planning, evaluation, DOT approval process for 3 new light rail lines. During the Bush administration, our team helped negotiate the White House's Office of Management and Budget, where we were able to find $30 million in other budgetary savings with OMB to help fund DART projects. We've also helped them secure a TIFIA loan for light rail. And just this past year, we helped them secure a RIF loan for their commuter rail line. On behalf of LA Metro, we were successful in securing over $200 million in discretionary grants from the Bush administration for bus and highway congestion improvements under the Urban Partnership Program. And finally, we've been successful getting Small Starts grants for several clients. Most recently, our work with the Trump administration, we were able to secure a Small Starts grant for the Sonoma Marin Area Rail Transit Agency, also known as SMART, for their Larkspur extension that will connect to their 43-mile commuter rail line to a ferry that will take passengers into San Francisco. So this is just a little bit of a summary of some of our successes for some of our other transportation clients.
One of the other questions that they asked us to talk to you about today is what our approach would be in working with TBARTA. We know that you have a challenge in trying to bring together, meet the transportation needs of 5 counties. So certainly our first step would be to sit down with the board members and the leadership of TBARTA, the staff, try and figure out your goals and your timelines for your projects. The second priority would be to introduce TBARTA and the concept of TBARTA to the Florida congressional delegation, other key members of Congress and federal agencies who may not be aware of TBARTA and your mission and your state charter. They will be, and we believe they're going to be tremendously happy to hear how this 5-county region is coming together with one voice and one vision for your project. So I think that's going to resonate well, and we've heard that from the Trump administration in our meetings with other clients. In addition, we're going to need to work with you and your staff to chart your goals and progress. So it's a large project with lots of moving parts. We need to set detailed timelines and goals of what needs to be done and when. And there must be coordination between all the federal agencies that will be part of this project. As you know, this isn't what you're trying to do, I don't think, is a traditional Federal Transit Administration project. It's going to involve other federal agencies, particularly a DOT, including the Federal Highway Administration. They're going to be a key partner as they move forward with the project to replace the Howard Franklin Bridge. You have the West Shore Interchange project and the Tampa Transit Center. So timing will be critical, and the federal partners will need to be kept fully aware and apprised of all the developments and the timelines you're trying to meet. Congress, we believe, has been a key driving force in setting the transportation agenda the last couple of years, trying to move the administration forward. And fortunately for Florida, we have good representation on important transportation and appropriations committees. As you know, Congressman Christ from this area has just been appointed to the Appropriations Committee. We now have 5 appropriators from Florida, which will be very helpful. One of those 5 is Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart, who we work with very closely on many issues. And he was the just past chairman of the Transportation Appropriations Subcommittee and will be the ranking Republican on that committee in this Congress. On the Senate side, we have Senator Rubio, who's now an appropriator. First appropriator we've had in the Senate from Florida in 16 years, so that's an important addition to the Florida delegation. So in keeping Congress and the federal agencies in the loop on this project, we also have to stay in very close contact with the Office of Management and Budget. We believe that's an agency within the federal government that's overlooked sometimes by firms, and they play a key role, behind-the-scenes role, in making sure projects are ready to go and move forward, and they can also be an impediment to projects moving forward too, so it's important we keep them in the loop on what you're doing. Finally, we're going to need to work aggressively to navigate and expedite the litany of federal studies, reports, permits, and authorizations that are going to be required for any projects to move forward. So this is an excellent time for you to be considering a federal team to help you out. There's great optimism in this Congress that we're going to move forward with a bipartisan, hopefully, federal infrastructure package this year. They're talking about having one on the House floor before Memorial Day. And this will be followed next year by a major reauthorization of our highway and transit programs that will last for the next 5 or 6 years. So Shannon's going to talk a little bit about the needs of TBARTA.
So one of the strengths that we bring to the table is that we have a deep understanding of the executive branch. We have regular communication with DOT and OMB, both the political appointees as well as key career staff. We also have the ability to access any other agency within the federal government that you may need help from or need assistance or guidance from. We have strong relationships with those key transportation committees, both on the authorizing side as well as the appropriation side, in the Senate and the House, and both sides of the aisle. We will use all of these relationships to try to create opportunities for you for funding your projects, for any regulatory issues, anything that you're trying to achieve through your legislative agenda. Finally, I just wanted to stress that we are really committed to communicating with TBARTA regularly. Oftentimes we hear from our clients, wow, we've never had this kind of communication with former consultants that we've had at the federal level. So we will communicate with you regularly on meetings we have, and submit to you reports on any sort of communications we're having with both, the executive branch, the legislative branch. And every single week, you will receive a summary of of transportation-related activities happening in Washington. This will include highlighting hearings, giving you a summary of hearings that have happened, letting you know about any sort of legislation and amendments that will come up, be debated, what the outcomes of those debates were, as well as the announcement of any new regulations and any grant opportunities that we see get posted, so that we can all help you strategize around all of those opportunities and sort of plan those out and help you see where all of that can fit.
Just because I know we've thrown a lot of information, 10 minutes isn't a lot of time, just wanted to let you know that we believe we put together a good team to help you out. We know we were ranked #1 by your evaluation committee because we think we offered a team that's with unparalleled experience and access to Congress. We have a deep knowledge of the local transportation needs with ties to the Tampa Bay area community. We have an extensive record of success, as Shannon talked about, in delivering funding and legislative solutions for our transportation clients. We have strong relationships with the Florida congressional delegation and other key members of Congress and their staff. As Shannon mentioned, we have experience of working with the political and the career staff at the U.S. Department of Transportation. And we have such a strong belief in this project, we actually were asked to make a best and final offer where we reduced our retainer by 11% or $54,000 to try and help you out with your budgetary situation. So we believe you need a firm that already has an understanding of the area, that understands your local transportation challenges, and is ready to step off smartly and get to work quickly to start delivering results for TBARTA. So we look forward to answering your questions and any information you may need from us.
Thank you, Harry, for that great presentation. We're going to go around from this end of the panel to ask a group of questions, and either or both of you can respond. Thank you. Commissioner Mitten.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good presentation. Thank you for bringing it to us. And I guess my question on the staff side is, pretty large firm and probably lots of clients. Would you be, and Mr. Palmer, be the three main contacts, the one we would be working with back and forth with Washington?
That's correct. Yeah, the way Stu Vanskoik is the president of our company, and the way he's always set up these engagements, he always has one person who's responsible. That's your person, 24/7. You need something, you call. And then that would be me. And part of the year I'm down here, so I'm available to come out in person. But myself, Steve Palmer, and Shannon will be your three lead, just as we're the three folks that work with PSTA. We're on their regular conference calls. We organize all their meetings to Washington. So we'd be the three faces you see all the time, but I would be the most responsible just to make sure the staff's getting what they need.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I too want to thank you for the presentation. Very nice.
Press your button again.
Okay. I too want to thank you for your presentation. It was very good. I'm going to ask you the same question I've asked the other two firms. I noticed you've done some work for PSTA. Could you expand on that a little bit, and then also tell me a little bit more about any other efforts you had in the state of Florida that were successful?
On transportation issues?
Yes, please.
Okay, sure. So, yeah, we have worked with PSTA. They came on board. I mean, they're, as you, I'm sure, are well aware, their primary project has been the Central Avenue BRT projects. We've been working with them for 3 years to help position them. We've sponsored trips for them to Washington and work with their career staff. Tried to keep them informed of what the Appropriations Committee, fortunately, the Congressional Appropriations Committees have been doing a great job at pushing this administration forward on small starts projects. We've been doing quite a bit of work with Congressman Diaz-Balart and those folks. And so, as Shannon mentioned earlier, we helped them get 2 low-no bus emission grants in the last 2 funding cycles, which was great for them. And we've also been working, PSTA has been very forward-leaning, as you probably know, on transit on demand and other innovative projects to deliver increased service to the community. And so we've been working with them, helped them with their sandbox grant. We coordinated an effort with Commissioner Long to help convince FTA of the need for a sandbox grant here to expand some of those transit on demand initiatives. And then we continue to work with the FTA to try and help, because they've been so innovative. A lot of the good work they're doing is not being counted. It's not being, as you can understand with HART, they're not counting some of these rides on transit and demand services to help with their apportionment. So we've been working with Congress to try and educate them as to the need to correct those formulas and help them out. As far as other transportation issues, we actually, one of my other clients is the city of Gainesville. So part of the city of Gainesville is their bus service up there. So we've been working with them. They're actually trying to move forward with an autonomous bus project up there. They've currently been held up by NHTSA has to grant them a waiver in order to use this autonomous bus on city streets. And so they're kind of, we've been trying to push through the process there. There's been a change in leadership at NHTSA, and that's been delayed a little bit. So we've been working primarily on the administrative front on that. And we also work with the county of Broward County, Broward County, like Hillsborough County, passed a sales tax initiative in November to increase their sales tax by 1% for 30 years, and that additional funding will all go into transportation projects. And so they've retained us to try and help them identify places where they can go to look for transportation funding for a variety of projects.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Kreisman.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Harry. Very impressive. I in particular appreciated the detail that you all gave to the approach to representing us, what our needs are. Obviously, you've already researched, and being a resident here, you know firsthand some of the needs that we have, mentioning West Shore interchange and the need that FHA is going to have to be as far as a partnership with us. So I'll just kind of ask you the same question that I've asked the other two. You mentioned in your story, it talks about bipartisan in nature. You have 55 employees. How would you describe the split amongst them as far as frequency of working with or directly working for Republicans or Democrats or having served in various capacities?
The split of our firm,
Yeah.
Republican, Democrat?
We're roughly 50-50.
I'm not sure I've ever done a head count of the 55, but.
But it's 50-50. I mean, Stu feels very strongly about having a bipartisan firm, and so that's something that's really thought of when we do new hires. So we look not only at the skill set and filling in sort of places where we would like to have clients or client base, but also look at maintaining that bipartisan split.
And that said, just because some of us were Republicans, I mean, I support them. I work with Democrats. I support Democrats. I go,
Sure.
we cross the aisle all the time. So we try and make relationships with the folks we're going to need to know to support our clients. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Commissioner Long.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I know you're trying to cut me
We're
off.
pushing it at the same time. No.
Okay, am I
Trying to
good?
get you on.
Okay. Well, thank you, Harry and Shannon, for your excellent presentation. And in full disclosure, I have to say I'm a bit biased to this particular firm because if you've ever been to Washington, D.C. with these folks, they are unbelievable when you're walking in the halls with them. Everyone knows them, and they know everyone. And the camaraderie and the level of respect that they have walking in the halls and out on the streets everywhere you go is just amazing to me. And I can attest that for over 30 years I have known Harry, and he has always been incredibly generous and kind and respectful and very, very responsive. Whenever you call and you need something, he is Johnny on the spot. So his firm not only represents PSDA, but they represent Pinellas County government. And in that regard, we go to him also for our county-wide transportation issues, and they have been very successful for us. So I can't say enough about how well their firm is regarded and how much we regard them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Harry, thank you for your service to Pinellas County especially, and Mr. Young. I actually got my start in politics as an intern with Mr. Young, and I don't want to date myself with that. It was actually before Harry's time, so that gives you an idea.
I won't say how long ago that was.
No, not going there. But Mr. Young actually converted me prior to the Reagan Revolution, so let's leave it at that. But anyway, that said, obviously your firm does a lot of work in Florida, and you do a great job. TBARTA, as you know, is a multi-county, 5-county regional board, however. And I want you to address any concerns anyone might have about any inherent conflicts of interest with money, because obviously representing Pinellas County, Pasco County, PSTA, and then TBARTA, we would love to all have enough money to go around for every wonderful project we had. But I have concerns that a firm of your size, may have to pick and choose between competing memberships.
Sure.
And if you can address that, and again, I'm not suggesting there's an issue, I just think it's something that the folks of Florida and of this board ought to be aware of.
Happy to do that. But by the way, one of the firms that interviewed earlier actually surpassed us in the number of clients they have, so they actually have the same situation that, we have in representing multiple clients. But, I mean, we represent Pasco County, we represent Pinellas County. But I think the project you're looking at FTA, nobody else other than PSTA competes with you in where you're trying to go with the Department of Transportation. The things we're doing with Pinellas County and Pasco County are in areas outside of U.S. Department of Transportation. So I don't think there's really a competitive problem there. In fact, I think you all are part of the beauty of TBARTA and what you're doing is you're all pulling together to try and achieve the same goals. So I think the Pinellas County, we had a meeting yesterday with the Pinellas County Commission and the Florida Congressional Delegation members that were there, and we spent probably 65% of the time talking about transportation and regional transit as being in need. So I think that everybody here, the city of St. Petersburg, the counties, are all pulling in the same direction. So I think we're actually working together. One of the early meetings we had with PSTA, HART came along with PSTA, and we did a joint set of meetings on Capitol Hill to advocate together for cooperative programs to support the entire area. So we work well with HART, we work well with Pinellas and Pasco. We've never had a conflict, I don't think, between any of our clients in competition. And I think, again, your project is unique enough. I don't see that there'll be a conflict there. I think, in fact, representing all of you together, I think actually helps push this project along.
Well, maybe if you gave that speech to the Hillsborough County Commission, they might get more on board. But I won't go there necessarily.
I'm just curious who their federal lobbyist is.
I don't know. But that said, thank you for that.
I wanted to just add one other thing, which is, we often get this question, not just about specific regions, but the fact that we do represent several public transportation agencies, multimodal agencies, and how does that work? And what I will always say to folks is when we go to DOT, when we go to these authorizing committees and these appropriations committees, we advocate on behalf of each one of our clients, and never once has somebody said, okay, rank the clients. Who do you really want to have stuff? That's not how it works. I mean, we fight for all of our clients equally, and everyone has unique challenges, unique approaches, and we help you strategize on your unique approach, and we execute that unique approach. And that may or may not be the same approach that we use with, for example, PSTA. So that doesn't mean one approach is bad, one approach is great. We're looking to get measured results for everyone. And that's never been an issue. And we've had several projects be funded out of the same grant programs at the same time. Grant programs, the same, things out of different appropriations bills. So that's not been an issue for us.
So
well, let's go around for Melanie, and then we'll take any supplemental.
could I just follow up on what she just asked, though?
Okay.
Because the reason I say that is because I want to speak to what Harry said about the joint meeting.
Turn yourself off again. Okay, now I got you.
The joint meeting that we had with HART and PSTA a couple years ago when Catherine Egan was the executive director, and one of the reasons that she was so anxious to come along with us and be with us is because they hadn't been able to get in to meet some of the folks that we had on our agenda. And so she found that very telling and tried to move so that we could all use the same folks. It just didn't work out that way. But I thought it was important to, I can't remember who asked the question, but thank you.
Thanks. Melanie.
I'm always happy to yield to someone with a personalized Yeti cup, so.
I know, I've been looking at that
I know,
thing
I'm pretty
over
jealous
there.
of it. It's really.
Well, we got it for a gift from one of our colleagues, actually.
I don't know if I can say this in a meeting, but it's badass. It's awesome. It's awesome.
Thank you.
I love the team approach, but I did want to get a handle on, in terms of the face in your meetings. Is it a third, a third, a third? And if it's, thank you for the assist. And if it's not a third, a third, a third, then who is, quote unquote, the face in the actual meetings with the representatives and the decision makers?
I mean, who would be going to the meetings?
I don't
You go to the
necessarily mean
Hill,
who's
who
going to
are
the
we
meetings, but like, for instance, in this meeting, I'll use this as an example. Shannon, you've done a lovely job. I would say that in terms of division of labor, I'm approximating, but you've kind of done like 70% of the talking, you've kind of done 30. So I'm just trying to get, in terms of like, who is the primary during meetings with the decision makers, how does your team divide that?
Sure, so I mean, an example would be the way we work with PSTA. I mean, some meetings, sometimes Steve and I go together for meetings, sometimes all three of us go together, it depends on the meeting.
And I'm just trying to get a rough feel for, and if it's a third of
Steve and I generally split the meetings when PSTA comes. Steve has worked with a number of transportation clients, so Steve's a Democrat, I'm a Republican. Sometimes I cover the Republican meetings, sometimes he covers the Democrat meetings. I usually cover the Florida meetings because I have experience with the Florida delegation. So, I mean, it's hard to say, 80%, 20%. I don't know what the exact percentage would be, and it kind of depends on who we'd be meeting with. Steve generally takes a good number of the meetings with the Department of Transportation because he's worked with those folks for 30-plus years, particularly the career staff. He knows them. They know him by name. And so he'll do that. So, I mean, we try to be a 50-50 split, but it just sort of depends on exactly who we're meeting with and what the subject matter is.
It also depends on who has the strongest relationship of the three of us. So oftentimes we'll make sure that whoever has the strongest, we all have similar relationships, but whoever has the strongest, we try to make sure they're in the room.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Starkey.
I'm not sure I have any questions, but I did want to disclose that Harry is our, sorry. And I think it's been mentioned here, we do use Van Scoik as our Pasco County federal lobbying firm, and we're very pleased with them. And I think our relationship with Harry and the firm is wonderful. You may not know, if you know Rick Michaels from Tampa, I think he and Mr. Van Scoik started out in business together many years ago, or they have some kind of. Yeah, they were working for the same company, I think, years ago. So it's an interesting little relationship I found out later. But I just think, they have a wonderful resume, and I think it's a plus to have Harry on the team with such great local knowledge, and I just really have no questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. And my relationship with Rick Michaels goes almost as far back as my internship. So we'll leave it at that. That said, Commissioner Seal.
Well, I have to echo Commissioner Long and Commissioner Starkey, and I can't remember how many years I've known Harry, and was very successful, and when he was with Congressman Young, and when we could get earmarks on getting earmarks for US 19. So my question, and I hate to be the dollars and cents person, but that's kind of where I'm at. I don't know what PSTA pays you all for your contract services or Pasco County, but I did check, and for Pinellas County, the gross contract is $95,000 a year. And we are such I appreciate that you already dropped your price, but we are such a fiscally constrained agency, and it's actually the counties that are coming forth for the funding in order to be able to afford to do this lobbying service. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there because you all will figure out over the years that I am all about, being fiscally conservative.
So just in response to that, I think we actually finished second lowest in the pricing for this and then dropped our pricing lower. We're actually, I think, priced at it. We understand that you've already awarded a state contract, and part of the budget you had set aside for government affairs was consumed by that. So we actually reduced our annual fee for the first year to $5,000 a month, which is less than all three of our clients here. Pinellas County, Pasco County, and PSTA pays us all more than that per month. So we're actually well below that, and this is going to be, I think, a much more complicated project. So I think you're getting a good deal, I think, for probably one of our lowest paying clients, I believe. So, but we believe in the project, and I think that it's important to move forward with a federal firm for you. So we believe in fiscal austerity too. Most of our clients are smaller. We don't have $250,000 a month clients. Most of ours are in the smaller $5,000 to $10,000 range.
Thank you. I would add to that, Harry, in all fairness to the other presenters too, that there was some negotiations with staff that went on prior to the committee voting not to make a recommendation to have the full board make consideration. No. So there is somewhat of a de novo consideration of the money involved and all of that, given the vote of the committee.
I understand
But
that.
said,
I just,
appreciate
we
your-
saw the document, so that's,
Absolutely.
we just.
Appreciate your efforts on that.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner, let's finish with him, and then we'll take final.
Shannon cleared up my concerns about the conflict of interest. Great job, so I don't have any questions.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Long.
Yes, I just wanted to speak real briefly to Commissioner Seal's concerns, because she's always a fiscal person on our board at the county. Well, you are, so it's a compliment. I do think that it's significant that the example you gave was for Pinellas County, but TBARTA has more than one county attached to it, and they are now, would be, if we chose them, would be working for all of those counties. So they're representing TBARTA. Oh, I don't know how you can say no.
Yeah, but they're not going to represent Hillsborough County or.
No, but they're going to be going there and talking to those members and going to.
True, they'll be having to circle
yeah.
around all the
Yeah.
counties, but.
Yeah,
I would
that's
suggest
what I
we
meant.
reserve any of those discussions to our discussions rather than the questioning at
Yeah,
this
I agree.
point. One final round of question I had, in terms of your connectivity with the agencies and USDOT, what is the highest level of appointed office that you interact with at USDOT?
So we generally interact with the administrative heads of the agencies, as well as we interact with Secretary Chow's Chief of Staff when we need to. We interact with the Assistant Secretary for Governmental Affairs, Adam Sullivan, when we need to. So those are the folks. We've also been able to get some of our clients in to see Secretary Chow herself when needed. So we have those connections to be able to do those things.
Part of the problem is that there are frankly a lot of vacancies in the administration right now. So there's a Federal Highway Administration Administrator who's been confirmed, or been approved by the committee, but not approved by the Senate yet, so there's an acting in that position. The FTA Administrator, Thelma Drake, was nominated last year, didn't get through the confirmation process, had to be renominated in January. So we've been working with Jane Williams, who's the acting. We've had several meetings. Commissioner Long's been in a couple of those. She's a Phillies fan, by the way, so Commissioner Long has noted that. So, I mean, I think there are a lot of openings there that we're dealing with the actings, frankly, and so, you know, we work with whoever's in place at the time, and we get to meet the new folks when they take office.
And what about White House staff?
Actually, we have a new hire we just brought on. Katie Petru just started working with us. She worked for Congressman Pence Vice President Pence when he was a congressman. She worked with Mark Short, his new chief of staff, when he was the chair of the Republican Conference. And so we work with the White House staff. We work with the Congressional Affairs Office at the White House. So we, you know, again, kind of a changing list of people there, but we tend to work with the folks that we need to work with.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Appreciate that, and
Thank you.
we'll bring everyone back in. Council, before I call a recess as a point of order, should we, before having discussion, have public comment, I assume, on this or prior?
You're just obligated to have public comment before you vote, so whenever you want to do that, you can do that.
I would prefer to do that prior to our discussion, so if the public has had the freshness of any presentation here, they can make comments, and then we can have our discussions. So that said, I'll take a 10-minute recess.
So I'm back.
Morning. It's still morning.
Bill, how are you?
I have just a little procedural question. On the agenda, the approval of the NWO Regional Foundation Best Practice Report is listed under. I normally would give the report and say, we voted unanimously to support the acceptance of the study by the governing board and to close out the project. So would then you take it and bring it forward? I'm not. It's a little different.
No, that's a good question. And I did not even notice that. But really,
I didn't notice it until I got it.
it really should be down under informational items.
Well, there is action that the board has to accept the report.
We did this.
Correct.
The evaluation.
That's what I can see is generally the CAC is not under action. We're just reports. So, but anyway, we can.
Good.
Yes, so
I'm a mess.
after you do your report, then I can chime in and say, as a follow-up item, presentation on the final report that was presented to the CAC, and we want to share that with the entire, okay, that makes total sense. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because I did not even notice that when the agenda went out. Okay, yeah, thanks.
I know, isn't that great?
Hey, how are you guys? Yes. Thanks for coming to our unbelievably long February board meeting. This is just like halftime, like, because we still have to get through the discussion, and we've got some presentations. Yeah, if we get out of here by 1, I'll be thrilled. Yeah, exactly. So interestingly, the day that I met you guys, right, I was finishing up interviews for a commuter, our director of commuter services position that was out, and that person who came in to interview with me worked for you guys for a couple of months. She's in Orlando, Lenina. Does that name ring a bell?
Yeah, she is Lenina Dawson, because
yes.
she, young girl.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
So she came in, and I was looking at her resume right before she walked in. I was like, oh my God! Like, I saw that job listed on her resume, and I was like, what are the odds that I would interview somebody who worked there the same day that I met you guys?
And she's a good one.
Yeah.
I hate to say overall because,
Still young. She's still young. Yeah.
Yes, right. Well,
She's very energetic. Yeah.
oh, she's super interesting. Yes, she is. So, is she still with the
Yeah.
She is. Yes. Actually, yeah, we do some work with train systems. We used to work at train systems.
Oh, is that right?
We worked for the best for 3 years.
Okay.
As a civil engineer, I think I mentioned that or something.
Okay.
But we are so excited to work with you.
Yeah, same here.
And we are easy to work with. We are. Until we work with.
As am I.
And that's great. We just want to be successful.
I'm kidding.
Say that we really are very sincere. It's an awesome contract for us. I'm excited about it. It's awesome. So we're looking forward to it.
No, I'm very excited to get things moving, and I mean, as you know, we've got the 2 big projects that we're moving forward: the regional TDP and the PD&E for our rapid transit system.
And the thing is this, which we cannot be with you to tell you, I've been doing transportation for 20 years. We practice qualified.
Oh, yeah, I got it.
All the way through this trucking thing, so we have all that background and knowledge of things to bring.
Good, how are you?
Yeah.
And all of this is happening at the same time.
I just texted
It's a
my
perfect storm.
staff to say, I'm not going to make it.
Requirements, really. We're getting the contracts in place.
Thank you.
We're building our staff.
Thank you.
Because there are 5 positions that I've been hiring for.
It's been a little more
And we're getting
frustrating
our funding
lately.
points to be able to
We're
do
going
everything that
through
we
a
need
big
to.
period of growth.
So it's
A
a
lot
great
of folks in my
time. It's
community
going to be an
seem to have
exciting
an
next
issue with
6 months or so.
And it's funny you say that, because
Yeah.
Really are.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks for
Stay
coming.
safe.
Appreciate it.
going through a nice period of growth, and then, of course, the ability to handle traffic.
No.
And part of that, I mean, where are you? And something,
No, no, no.
You're on the
Oh.
mic.
This is,
Don't tell anybody, it's still a secret anyway.
Cards fall, but, we've had, and, I've had to, I don't get a vote on my council. For strong mayor form, but I'm impressed with it.
we certainly are. Yeah, we're following the law.
Yeah, I know. Within your purview, change it. Right.
Appreciate that.
We try.
Appreciate that.
I have this one. And what I'm gonna do is put a beautiful one, and if we have another one, can we make a copy of that?
Absolutely.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's my biggest concern right now. We can continue, I describe myself, and we're nonpartisan, but we all get pigeonholed in our parties.
Unfortunately, not that far. But eventually you'll see.
Yeah.
And I think you can grow. You can grow in a way that you maintain your character, but you gotta keep growing.
What? Right.
Probably more than I would like to sometimes, not necessarily, they're all.
Go out the door and then go around to the room right around the corner. Absolutely.
A little different. Other presentations and all that I see, I've seen.
Yes.
But,
They're about to vote now.
I hope so. I gotta
I could probably deliver their presentations.
I give you this.
Lucky thing, I was supposed to go pick up mine and then.
I'm gonna have this.
Well, I have been having.
No, give me a number. Just to let me know they pay.
Okay. Okay.
So for example, Manuel, he's not here. Right?
Yeah.
So he'll say, I pick change. Okay, and then at the end of the day, what I want to do is I want to.
Gentlemen.
Yes.
Excited.
Okay.
You
Yeah,
are
Blackberry.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
that way.
David Gwen.
We can make sure.
Good. That'll be I have to leave by
Right,
12:15 too.
coming right back. So this- just in case it doesn't hurt.
Okay.
There's four of us keep this one.
Okay.
That way, we all on the same page.
Follow up with you.
And I'm gonna just come over to you and I'm let me know who.
Followed up with that?
Thank you.
That one, what is that one? That's me. What does that one say? See, that's him.
Who's moving?
So they just have not centered, is probably what it was. The right order, just not centered correctly.
I'm just filling you in because I can't.
Yeah, no. I was supposed to, I thought we'd be done at 11:30 and I had arranged for a phone call with my.
Back.
Up to be the dean of the business school, so I didn't know which Dr. Charles.
Oh, I know, they all are alike.
Oh, really?
There's always one more thing to do.
Oh, yeah?
Great.
Good to see you too. It's always interesting.
Same last
Serious wins. I mean, we're gonna limit the amount of dynasty. Those guys are so excited. I mean, if you look at their board of directors, they've got the former head of the SEC. They have 4 billionaires, including the former head of American Express. These guys are serious players.
No, that was, I read the story.
I'm glad we were able to do them.
Probably one of the reasons we're there is they want to know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I have a saying to say all the time. I always say, if I can get you, I got you. And our city.
Peter does a good job. He finds money where nobody else finds it.
That's one of our target markets. Financial services.
Our safety insurance.
Okay, that's cool.
And interesting, And this speaks a lot about our market.
Great, thank you.
Raymond James wants to reach out. Feel welcome. Where do you see that? And I think he will. Jeff's a good guy. That was a little more challenging, but you know,
And I hear you're
and
retired.
I told them this.
From full-time law. Yeah.
Yeah, so I have a passion.
We can make it every year. My staff's already giving me the numbers based on things that they've seen.
That is what I work in, yeah, so that was why I was late, is I was trying to
it's just up to
get everything ready for every day, so.
Hey, after you, Orlando or Tampa?
So, I lived in Tampa.
I've already texted my folks. I'm figure I'm going to be late. So I'll be able to vote.
Then when we got over there at time. But what helped is that I found this app called Driver, and for anywhere between $14 and $19.
Oh!
I know you're worried about it.
I'm worried. I mean,
I'm worried about it.
So it's
We've already had one meeting.
yeah, so it's just like booking a hotel. So you go online and you're
We've got
like,
another
I
one
want
getting
to drive
scheduled. I just talked to Matt this morning. I talked to Brian the other day.
and then they drive you wherever you want to
so
go.
you can work while you're driving.
And that's because about 3 years ago, it was a time crunch. It was like, especially with how they didn't plan well.
I don't weigh in either way on these things. I close my
Drive. Yeah, so that's what it
Can everyone take their seats? We're going to reconvene.
With Ron. Who did he, I called Brian. So, hey. And Duncan.
Have a comment card?
Yeah, high velocity or high vertical.
And then they sold to
Okay. I've been.
We're going to reconvene the meeting. Everyone take their seats, please. Could you call the roll? Here.
Melanie Griffin.
Here.
Cliff Manuel is excused. Commissioner John Minton.
Present.
Commissioner Cascam. Excused. Commissioner Reggie Bellamy.
Here.
Commissioner Catherine Starkey.
Here.
Commissioner Karen Seal.
Here.
Rick McLean.
Here.
Commissioner Janet Long.
Here.
Mayor Kreisman.
Here.
Mayor Bob Buckland is excused. Secretary David Gwynn.
not voting.
I'm here, President. Thank you.
Thank you, and a quorum is present, correct? You verify that for the record. All right, the first person to comment is Rick Homans. Chair recognizes Rick Homans.
My name is Rick Homans. I'm the CEO of the Tampa Bay Partnership. Mr. Chairman, members of TBARTA, thank you for allowing me to speak for just a minute. I don't want to weigh in on any of the specific candidates who have come before you this morning, but I hope that you will consider as key to the criteria that you're using to make a selection the fact that the BRT project, the regional BRT project, which is really the core project for TBARTA, is riding the coattails, so to speak, and depends fundamentally on the success of the highway improvements taking place in Tampa Bay. And specifically, as we come into Hillsborough County, the West Shore interchange, to be able to come through from the Howard Franklin into Hillsborough County unimpeded. And so what I think is critical over the next couple of years is to expedite that project and also to be able to separate the West Shore interchange from the rest of the components of the highway project that are part of the supplemental environmental impact statement, because that could be delayed for some time. And this project cannot stand for any delays. It's got to move as quickly as possible, and it's got to be done in conjunction with the highway improvements. If we don't have the West Shore interchange improved to be able to move through, then basically we'll have BRT buses coming beautifully across the bridge, and then they're going to be stuck in traffic for miles and miles and miles, and we'll lose all the benefit of the investment in a BRT project. So we need the influence, we need at the federal level, at the executive level, in order to make the changes to expedite, to separate out this project from the rest of them, and I hope that you'll consider that when you make a selection of a firm today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick. Any other public comments? None being heard, I will now close public comment on this issue. Chair recognizes Al to further discussions, and council is going to give some remarks on the process.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Al Burns, Director of Procurement. Now you've heard all three offerors. Once again, just to remind you, the evaluation criteria that the goal is that you rank one firm as your recommendation to move forward with. To reemphasize the evaluation criterion is the firm's experience, their team, and approach to TBARTA. General Counsel?
So I just wanted to go over a couple things and a couple options. First, just a reminder that under your enabling legislation, it requires 7 to pass any motion. So obviously you have a couple options today. Because Van Scoik was the recommendation of the evaluation committee, you already have their best and final offer. So if that was the selection today, you could move forward with an award to them, and that would be your final action on this item, and staff would proceed to get the contract signed. If Van Scoik is not who you want to go with today, or you want to consider best and final offers from the other 2 entities, you have an option of asking staff to obtain best and final offers from the other 2 entities, or you could select one of the other 2 entities as your first choice and ask for a best and final offer from them. But I would suggest that if you're going to go with one of the other 2 options other than Van Scoik, that you direct staff to obtain a best and final offer, which we could bring back at your next meeting. And that's the process that's set forth in the RFP that was issued. And since they were not the recommendation, they were not asked for the best and final offer.
Thank you, counsel, for those remarks. And as I announced at the outset, we're going to have a brief commentary from each member of the panel and then open it up to discussion. And
just a question about if we can negotiate as opposed to the best and final offer.
Absolutely. And the chair recognizes David to make a couple. Why don't you make a couple comments on that?
I just had a question for council. Based on my background in procurement, best and final offer means something very specific to me, and I'm used to going through a negotiation process. So I'm wondering about that step, because if you ask for a best and final offer, it is what it is, and there is no more negotiation that can occur, as opposed to if you go through a negotiation process, you've got a ton of flexibility for give and take to get things into a position financially to where TBARTA would need it to be based on the resources that are available.
Well, I guess we can do that, but my understanding was with Van Scoik, we just asked for a best and final offer. We didn't do that. So I'm only concerned that we do something, we try to be consistent with all 3, or if we eliminate 1 today, 2. But my understanding was we didn't do that with Van Scoik.
Mr. Chair?
And maybe I'm wrong, but Mr. Burns can correct me, but my understanding was we just asked him for a backhoe.
Well, I would never correct General Counsel, but I just
But you're going to.
I just kind of want to walk through what I did. For lack of better terms, I entered into discussions / negotiations with Van Scoik, and we did have a conversation over the phone, and after that conversation, I did request their best and final offer. So if I could be so bold, I would recommend, along with Alan's, along with the line of the Executive Director and General Counsel, I would ask that if another firm is recommended, that you allow me to enter into negotiations and bring back the results of those negotiations before the board. And part of the negotiation At the end of negotiations, it's best practice that you ask for a best and final offer.
I would concur with that, and subject to council's approval, I would think that ultimately, any offer would be subject to negotiations.
Just to clarify, you mean negotiations if it's recommended with Chambers and Conlon and Ballard Partners, or with Van Scoik as well?
The first, Chambers and Ballard Partners. Yes, ma'am.
He already did it with Van Scoik.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understood when you said negotiate. It's the, yeah, I got it. Ladder 2, you do consider this a best and final after negotiation. Got it.
Council, is that satisfactory?
Yes.
All right, that said, we'll
Right,
move
that's what
on
Said he did with Van Scoik.
to comments. Commissioner Minton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have three good solicitors here, and I appreciated the presentations. I think each one brings strength to what we're looking for. Interesting, the different philosophical approaches, whether it is a nonpartisan approach, whether it is a particularly partisan approach in relationships, whether it is relationships in Florida, relationships in D.C., whether it is even dealing mostly with rail or bus, even down to whether it would be synergistic to have multiple clients in the same area or whether it would be prohibitive. And so I think it's interesting as this board looks at this decision that we contemplate what it is precisely that we are looking for, because one of these is going to do a better job than the other two. If we can find out what that is here amongst us, I think that's our challenge.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to echo my colleagues' comments here. We had three what I would call very good firms present here today, all of them extremely capable of doing what they're doing. I took a hard look at all six of them, to be frankly honest with you, when I received the package and saw the breakout. I think, and I did that because, as Rick Homans is not here anymore, as Rick mentioned, I think we're in a critical time, not only for TBARTA, but for the region. And I think having that right firm to help us and move these through and the things we have to do is absolutely critical. I will tell you, I do believe we need those relationships. Understanding this is a 3-year with 2 option periods, I think we do need those firm, hard relationships to help us move forward. I also looked at the price. I am usually a fiscal hawk, but I think because of this importance of this decision, and then I looked at the dollars that everybody presented, and if you look at it, I asked Mr. Burns earlier what was the baseline price, and if you just do the math right here on paper, it's $600,000. So I looked at that and said, okay, so let's throw that out and just look at qualifications. And so when I looked at that, it became evident to me who we should have here. All three firms presented extremely well, and as I mentioned, all three firms have quite a lot of capabilities. All three firms also come with a little bit of concerns. And so as we move forward, I will look to support one, but I do appreciate this conversation, and I think we ought to look at it that way, if you would, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Mayor.
So it sounds as if, at least at this stage, we are not getting into our recommendations. It sounds like we're not getting into who our specific recommendation is as to who we are leaning towards. So I guess I'll make some general comments then, too. I agree, without trying to be repetitive, 3 excellent candidates, 3 very qualified firms. Transportation, I can tell you, I've gone on recruiting missions to several cities outside of the state of Florida, trying to recruit businesses to this region. And transit and transportation come up in every single conversation. And so the importance of the decision we make as far as helping us move the ball forward as an organization is absolutely critical if we're going to continue to grow this region and attract jobs and create jobs in this region. We've got to have a more robust transit and transportation system. And so I think this decision is quite important because I think it's really important that we've got folks who have the experience. The criteria, I think, it hits it on the head. They've got to have the experience on transit issues. They've got to have a team that's capable of representing us on both sides of the aisle. I think that's really important, especially when we have a House that's under the control of one party and a Senate under the control of another. And I think the approach that they are taking in working with TBARTA is important too. And I think we've had 3 organizations that have really done a good job of spelling out the way they will look at it. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll stop talking, is in my questioning, in my comments, I did not make any or state anything about the relationship and my relationship that I've had with Harry over the years. What I will be doing is not allowing that relationship and my experience with him to sway my feelings one way or the other. But having said that, I have certainly enjoyed working with him over the years, both from my time as a council member to as a state representative to the seat I now hold. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Commissioner Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would echo a lot of the comments that my colleague here, Mayor Kreisman, has already said. I think all 3 of the firms had very impressive presentations, and they are all eminently qualified in their own arenas. I do believe that today we are looking at 2 firms especially who have very strong transportation experience, transit knowledge within the federal bureaus of transit in Washington, as well as the administration, and that we are well suited to pick a very good firm, and I think it's probably one of the most important decisions that we will make on behalf of TBARTA going forward. And given how hard a lot of us have worked on getting the finances in a really, really good place, I'm hopeful we are going to give the same kind of consideration to this vote as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, and I would like to first thank all the presenters for wonderful presentations. You guys did a great job. TBARTA would honestly be proud to have any of you as our lobbyist. I think that goes without saying here. I'm going to diverge a little bit from my colleagues' neutrality on this position, because I think TBARTA is at a unique point in history now where the stars are kind of aligned. Some time ago, it was Miami's turn to get their transit down there. Then it was Orlando's turn. The stars are aligned now with us, with the state legislature, with a governor, and I think with the President of the United States that is wanting to make all of that happen for this region. And with that in mind, I think we have to look, as I said at the outset, as transportation is something that is in a disruptive phase now. It is not work as usual, garden variety, working an administration for grants over a long period of time. It is going right to the top and getting an appropriation and getting the job done. And I think we have a narrow window of opportunity to do that for the Tampa Bay region. With that in mind, I think one firm stands out, and that is Ballard Partners. And I say that based on its overall totality of connectivity to this region, to this state, to Washington, D.C., and to all the relevant officials involved at the highest levels of government. So, again, it is an agonizing choice to have to make for all of us, because we heard 3 great firms here today. But to get the job done that I was appointed to do, I think that I would rest my faith with Ballard Partners to move this forward. So I'm going to give them my endorsement.
I echo the chair's sentiments on that, and with that in mind, my number 2 was actually Chambers and Conlin. I thought that if we were looking to transit, I was just interested in seeing a different face in terms of in terms of who we have representing our region, to make sure that we do have distinctive Florida representation for our project, as well as I was very impressed with that presentation, the professionalism of each of the members of that team. And with that in mind, I would be interested in seeing best and final offers from Ballard Partners as well as Chambered Conlin to see what we can do with those pricing.
Thank you, Melanie. Mr. Starkey.
Well, that's interesting, because I want to say also all three firms, I think, would do a great job representing us, and I've known Todd for a number of years too. I'd mentioned Harry, so I should mention that I've known Todd for quite a while, and I have no doubt Ballard would do a good job for us, but I, like Commissioner Seal, am a little concerned on the price, considering the fiscal constraints that we have. So I think I'm going to stick with my original thoughts, even though all the presentations were fantastic. And frankly, I wish we could take a little piece of all three of them and put them together, and then I know we'd have a major home run. But I'm very comfortable with Van Scoik as our selection. I'm glad they reduced their price. Otherwise, I probably would not have gone that way. But I think it makes it a little difficult to not know if a price is a real indicator of my selection, part of my selection, and not knowing the best prices from the others. I feel I'm at a little disadvantage to make a fair selection. So with that.
Thank you. And that said, in all fairness to other participants, because the Finance Committee did not vote out a recommendation, and that is why we're all here today to conduct these interviews. So obviously, I think we would be kind of looking, at these renegotiations again, should we make that choice. Commissioner Seal.
And I concur. I've also known Anna and Todd for a long time as well. I think all three firms did an excellent job. I tend to support the evaluation committee's ranking because they, it was TBARTA staff as well as our BMO employees, and I'd like to see, it sounds like with the best and final offer, we still can't negotiate. I wish we could. I appreciate what David said, and I think in the future we should be mindful of that in our negotiations and be careful about saying best and final offer. So that's where I'm at, following what the evaluation committee's recommendation was. But that being said, I wouldn't mind if Chambers, Conlon, and Hartwell wanted to give us a price. I'm not familiar with the firm, but I was very impressed by their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Commissioner.
Yep, I learned a lot, and the ballot presentation actually introduced me to a lot of things. However, with the recommending committee, I try not to go against that also because they do a lot of work behind the scenes that sometimes we're not familiar with to put things in order. So where I am right now, I would be interested in those other two as far as how they come out with their numbers to see, so we can see where we are. But where I am right now is just to stay with what the committee recommended, unfortunately. Fortunately, so that's right.
Okay, with that in mind, I'll open it up to discussions, but I am hearing a general consensus from the floor here that people kind of want to see some best and final offers here.
So moved.
Thank you, Counselor. Is there you want to you want to elaborate, amplify the motion, or?
No, I would. I mean, I said it in my comments. I would like to see a best and final from both Ballard Partners and Chambers Conlon. And so, if I get a second, I would love to see if that resolves it, or if we do want to take an actual vote on the committee's recommendation.
Is there a second on that?
Chair, I'm more than happy to second that. When I started my discussion earlier, I shied away from my recommendation of who we would go with, which, and frankly honest, would be Ballard Partners also. Again, I didn't look at price. I looked at qualifications, and of course, where we're at in our community's history right now, I think is important. And I think they're the ones that could get us over that fence. But that's where I'm standing, but I will second that motion and we can go forward.
There has been a motion and a second, and now discussion will ensue.
So,
Mayor Kreisman.
Yeah, and my question is as to the motion, and before I get into discussion on the main part. So if this motion were to pass, does that mean that our focus then is on these two firms that we're asking for best and final on, because that's what initially the discussion was? Or does that mean all three are still on the table?
My understanding, and this is what my intent was with the motion, was that then we would get best and finals to be presented to us at our March board meeting and then have a vote on all three firms at our March board meeting. And if I misunderstood the process that someone else was envisioning, I'm happy to welcome a friendly amendment, but that's what I intended with the motion.
Does that answer your clarification?
Yes, if that's, it does.
John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that the challenge with the best and final offer is that of negotiation. And so many times, typically, when you have these RFPs and you have the proposals that come forward, there's a scoring and there's a ranking, and then staff would then go perhaps to the first two, and then for the first one, and get that contract negotiation. If that doesn't work out, then they would go to the second, et cetera. And especially since we have one that is debilitated, having already provided a best and final offer. And it's unfortunate that we're in that situation, but I think the negotiation is perhaps the best way to go about doing this with these three firms in our situation.
I concur, and I think our executive director does as well with that analysis here, and thank you, David, for bringing that up. We know we hired you for a reason.
I do have one question on that, though. If it's a best, as I understand it, this is to council, it's a best and final because Van Squeek called it a best and final, not because TBARTA called it a best and final. If that firm wanted to withdraw its best and final and negotiate, is that permissible? Or is...
Well, I believe it was staff that called it asked for a best and final.
It was.
But do you see what I'm saying? But then when you respond and say, this is my best and I understand that it was requested, but then when you respond and say, I'm just saying that I don't think that Van Squeek, now sitting in the audience hearing this conversation, my understanding is that if we did make this decision, and Chambers and Conlin and Ballard Partners are allowed to negotiate their numbers, if Van Squeek wanted to, they would not be prohibited. Is that correct?
I'd have to go back and look at the RFP to answer that question.
Got it. Okay, that's what I want.
Which I can look at.
Well, in all fairness, I think all firms should be able to do that. Yeah,
that's where I'm going with it.
No one should be bound by any prior determination.
Yeah. I'll amend my own motion and look for the second. Is that I would be comfortable with confirming whether that is a best and final from Van Squeek, and if not, accepting a lower price if they wanted to offer it, as well as negotiating with Chambers, Conlin, and Ballard Partners. That's my motion.
Friendly motion. Mayor Kreisman.
Do you want to confirm the second? Is that?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you. Just a question and a comment. A question is the scoring that we have in front of us, was that scoring done, at least it looks like it was, before the best and final from Van Squeek had been received?
Yes.
Yeah, so the way it was done, the evaluation committee did the scoring on the qualifications, and then staff just took the price and did the calculation, and I believe that was done before the best and final.
Okay, so the rankings that we have are, if I understand, are based before there was a best and final even put on the table. Okay, and so the comment I guess I would make is to some degree, I mean, I certainly understand why there's a desire to hear from the other two finalists, but it does somewhat give them an advantage that Van Squeek did not have, and that, you know, when they put a best and final on the table, it was without having the knowledge of where anyone else potentially could go, whereas the other two now have that knowledge of where they were at and can potentially respond accordingly.
That's precisely why we're opening it up to all three firms to resubmit and renegotiate.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you.
You know, this is an attended 3-year contract with 2 one-year options, and you know, times and circumstances and leadership can change, and you know, I just think we need to make sure we are in a good bipartisan firm, and I guess that's all that I would like to say.
I think everyone shares that sentiment.
And someone who has transit experience.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the negotiation is where we need to go. However, I'm wondering if we should provide some level of ranking at this point, or we're going, so here's what we're basically doing. We're talking about the criteria, and we were asked to look at the approach and the team, and then the relationship with the support with TBARTA. One might certainly put price in either one of those. Certainly the relationship with TBARTA might be highly leveraged by how much we're having to pay for it. However, if it's simply negotiation and they come back, we've heard the presentation today on these three criteria. I think we ought to rank them based on the criteria we heard today, and then let the negotiation be that final determiner.
I agree.
Well, that's not the motion.
That's not the motion. That's why, that's all my comments to that motion.
But we're in discussion.
I guess I don't consider it a friendly, which I usually try to get along, I don't consider it a friendly amendment simply because I do think that, and particularly, and I'm so sorry, I know you're from Manatee County because I'm a proud Manatee High School graduate. I just cannot remember your name.
Go Canes, go.
Go Canes, yes, I'm so sorry, I can't remember your last name.
Bellamy.
Thank you. Commissioner Bellamy brought this up, is that understanding that you wouldn't necessarily go against the committee's recommendation, it also did sound like the price was maybe playing a factor in that, if I am reading you correctly, and if I added the points between the 117 given to Van Scoik to Ballard Partners 93, it would bring Ballard Partners within 10 points of Van Scoik. I just think it could have, that price really, given the closeness of the technical scores, it really could play an issue with whether Ballard Partners can get close to Van Scoik or not, I think.
I would concur with that. And I think that if we get too wrapped up into that now, there was a general consensus. People wanted to hear kind of some financial numbers here to, again, make their entire decision. So I would tend to agree with that. Do you wish to challenge that, Commissioner Minton?
I think what's interesting is that, and I don't know that we'd have 7 votes for a consensus on ranking anyway at this point. And so based on that lack of qualification, if price is that important and that's the one criteria that everyone's kind of sitting on, then I would yield.
Thank you. Yes.
I'm going to caution you not to think or not to lean on price. It seems like we're zeroing in on price versus qualifications and the ability to move the ball forward. This is a 3-year, two-year option. The price is spread across 5 years. You could stagger that cost in as you go, short this year, of course, because of funding, and build that up as you go. I would not base this sole decision on the price. I think it's the wrong way to go. I think the qualifications is the right way to go.
Yeah, and I think we can leave some leeway to staff to have those discussions with the folks competing for this. And I I think that would be implicit within the motion for you to do that. It's part and parcel of what you're doing. Commissioner Starkey.
I just want to clarify that price was not the only factor for me. Transit experience was also probably most important to me, and then price second. So just for clarification.
I did have one question, because I want to make sure the committee can answer it, and if not, we can then, if the motion passes, if the motion passes, then if any further detail needs to be gathered before March, we'll have it. It seemed to me from the presentations that Van Scoik and Chambers Conlin had similar experience, or at least a similar number of clients, and so I was wondering why the technical scores are so different for those two firms.
From the committee?
From the committee, why, understanding that there's a lot of goodwill towards Van Scoik and that we know them, I get that, but is that what is playing into that? It's because we're familiar and we're not as familiar with Chambers Conlin, or is there a true, I'm looking at that 60-point difference in terms of what the technical qualifications actually are. It actually sounded like, according to Van Scoik, that they thought Chambers Conlin actually had more clients in this area than they did.
So if I could respond, the evaluation committee evaluated the proposals that were submitted in response to the RFP. We didn't have the benefit of interviews, so there was specific information requested in the solicitation, and proposers are expected to comply with what is requested. So we evaluate based on all of that information. We don't have conversations with them. It's just solely what's in that document.
Gotcha.
And that's where the technical scores came from.
Yeah.
It's what they communicated in their proposals.
And I would add to that, having been present at the Finance Committee hearings, it was mentioned that staff's report should be given due weight as appropriate, but we're up here to carry out a fiduciary obligation to vote based on the totality of circumstances and not rely on staff's four corners of a document and reading that, but hear everything that has to be heard. So I would caution the board not to get too weighted on staff's original analysis of these things based upon a written presentation without the benefit of interviews, and that's why I think we're all here to have the interviews.
Got it, okay.
Mayor Kreisman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to just make some comments about my view of the three candidates, because it appears that the direction we're headed right now is that this is going to come back at the next meeting. And I'm not sure, based on my schedule and looking at it, that I'm going to be able to be here.
We will be in Panama.
Yeah.
Right.
I'll be in Panama.
Yeah, so, I looked at what we were told we're supposed to look at, which is the criteria, which is the experience, the team that they've got, and their approach to TBARTA. Of the three finalists, two of them clearly stand out when it comes to experience related to transit over the third. If the most important qualification for experience was a relationship with the president, then one clearly stands out. But this is a transit organization that isn't just going to the White House for dollars, they're going to Congress and to the FHA and FTA. And I think we have to look at that because we're seeking transit dollars. And certainly two of the three, when it comes to transit, have far greater experience. The team, again, I mentioned this earlier in my comments, you have the Senate under control of one party, the House under control of another party. So the makeup of the team is equally important, and how bipartisan is the team. And once again, I think that based on the information we heard today, clearly two of the teams, two of the candidates have a little greater balance related to that piece. And then the third piece was the approach to TBARTA and how they're going to relate to TBARTA. And I thought that, again, we had some greater clarity from one than the other two, but even the second one, looking at their approach, things needed, spelled it out pretty well. I think my feeling is that the committee did a good job, and I tend to agree with the committee's ranking of how they've ranked them, and that's without even taking the finances really into consideration, because the best and final wasn't considered at the time the ranking was done. So if I was voting today, I'd be voting for Van Scoyer, with Chambers coming in very close second, based on primarily and predominantly on their transit experience, which we need.
Thank you, Mayor, and I think the earlier consensus that we're not going to reach the bellwether of 7 votes here today would militate in favor of us obviously deferring this, and given the fact that certain commissioners might not be present in March, there's no exigency to get this done in March. It could be deferred to the April meeting. Obviously, there's widespread interest in this thing, and it is crucially important. And I will remind everyone that there is no FTA administrator right now, so there is no federal rush the same way there is a state rush to get up to Tallahassee because our legislature's got to meet in March. So that said, I think the motion has been put second. There's been ample discussion and very creative discussion. I thank you for that. So I'm going to call a vote on the motion. Please read the roll.
Jim Bolton?
Yes.
Melanie Griffith?
Yes.
Commissioner John Minton?
Aye.
Commissioner Reggie Delaney?
Yes.
Commissioner Catherine Starkey?
Yes.
Commissioner Catherine Seal?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries unanimously. Again, thank all the presenters for coming. We will try to act in as timely a fashion as we can to get this done, and maybe give you all a chance to come back to the nice warm weather if you don't already live here. So thank you for that, and thank you, commissioners, for moving forward with this. Commissioner Seal, did you have a comment?
I just, I know some of us need to leave very quickly, so I don't know how much longer we'll be meeting. I need to change some things if we're going to be here for a while longer.
I think we can move through this rather quickly. I don't think there's going to be there's going to be presentational materials and no actual votes, so you're excused if you need to leave in a timely way.
Mr. Chair, I may have to excuse myself, sir.
Yeah, thank you. You too. Thank you. Thank you all, and thank you for your patience.
Thanks, though. Speaking of working on the presentation.
While these folks are leaving, Chair recognizes Bill Johnson for a report on the Citizens Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I will be brief. The CAC met on February 20th in Pasco County in the offices of American Consulting Professionals. Thank you, Commissioner Starkey, for allowing us to meet in your county. A quorum was present with 10 members on site and additional 4 members participating by phone. We heard a presentation from Scott Lane of Stantec and Jeff Kramer of Cutter presenting the final results of the MPO Regional Coordinations and Best Practices Research Study. The committee unanimously voted to support the acceptance of the study by the governing board and to close out the project. Sean Sullivan of the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council presented the Tampa Bay Regional Resilience Coalition, and the committee voted unanimously to support the TBARTA's continued involvement in the coalition. Our committee members discussed the importance of personally understanding transit in Tampa Bay through firsthand experience. As such, we see this as very valuable insight in the continuing process, and we will take on the goal of getting that experience ourselves. And we will continue that discussion and report back our ridership experiences. And our next meeting will be April 17th at PSTA. Thank you. That's our report.
Thank you for your report. Next item of business is the chairman's report, and I'll be...
I was just going to say, we do have a presentation related to the MPO best practices study.
Okay, is that going to occur now?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I think you should defer.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a motion to table this or defer to a more appropriate time.
There's no one
Is
here.
there a second to that motion?
Yeah.
We can't vote on it anyway, so the chair will defer this presentation to the March meeting.
Well, that being said, is our consultant having to fly from out of town to be here?
That would be up to the...
I'm not sure where they're... Are you guys available in March?
Not scheduled or contracted to come back down for me. Mr. Kramer is certainly adequate to do the presentation. I can attend by phone, answer questions if that's the easiest mechanism.
I think that makes more sense than
Yeah, I would direct staff to work that out with you guys.
I agree, and after what you've just been through, I'm kind of nervous about presenting to you right now.
I've seen the report.
I have too. But,
yeah,
I mean,
but other
there's
board
3 of us
members
already that'll be missing in March.
But we've seen it. The 3 that are missing have seen the report because they presented at our MPO. But the gubernatorial appointment folks have not, right? And maybe the city.
Well, hopefully that can be disseminated to members to ask questions and interact the process.
Yeah, it's a good report.
My remarks are very brief. The only announcement I have is Commissioner Mitten is being appointed to the Finance Committee. Welcome. And we hate to get you down here too early, but hopefully you can make those trips or attend by phone for those meetings. And welcome aboard. Commissioner Long was going to give the legislative committee, but Natalie, are you still here? Can you give a brief remark on what's going on in the legislature in terms of legislation impacting us?
Be happy to. Natalie King with RSA Consulting. Just as follow-up from the legislative committee meeting that we held this morning, we provided an update on the timeline of where we're at in the legislative process, being that we just concluded the 6 of 6 committee meetings. We will be in the district this coming week, starting the first week of March for the 60-day legislative session. We reviewed the status of our one specific appropriation request, which is the $1.5 million request for funding, with our bill sponsors being Jackie Toledo in the House. Am I lying? I'm lying. No, Jackie Toledo in the House, and then Senator Brandis in the Senate will be working with us to make sure that's in the Senate budget. We are seeking recurring dollars. We do understand, though, that when we first see the budget come forward, we would anticipate that it will be looking like non-recurring dollars because of the process in Tallahassee, and we'll be working closely with Senator Galvano and our bill sponsors to assure that that funding is recurring. We have ongoing conversations and are monitoring other bills as they pertain to issues that could affect or be opportunities for our organization. We are going to be working through the DOT package at the House and Senate on the 2 changes to the Enabling Act that we have discussed previously regarding achievement of our quorum based on the appointment of our mayors, as well as seeing how we can best position our bylaws and the statutory language for electronic communications for our meetings. Further, we will be, again, starting in 2 weeks, we'll start reporting on a regular basis to our Executive Director. We just had Executive Director Green up for the second visit to Tallahassee. He has met with nearly 40 different elected officials, 23 from the Bay Area delegation, and thanks to his connectivity with our members, he has been invited by Senator Galvano, chair of the Bay Area legislative delegation, to come up next Tuesday, or come down next Tuesday to Manatee County, being held at Moat Marine, and present on TBARTA's behalf on the BALD agenda to all of the members. So we're very pleased that that has happened, and we're looking forward to that presentation next week.
Thank you, Natalie, and I think the fact that commissioners had to leave today underscores the urgency of getting that bylaws changed and that approved for telephonic meetings.
Agree with you, Chairman.
Especially for all these folks that have to travel from a large distance to come here, but thank you for a very cogent report. Any questions for Natalie before she, any questions? Thank you so much. There was no February policy committee, so there's no report there. There was no transit meeting in February, no report. Bob, do you want to present now? We'll give you the offer of doing that at another time, but we are anxious to hear about Brightline and what we're doing here, so it's up to you.
Mr. Chairman, I'll leave the decision up to you. I guess I scared everyone away. Commissioner Starkey wasn't kidding when you're not allowed to say the word train, I guess. But
your train is exception.
Yeah.
To that.
So I can present today. I've already marked March 22nd on my calendar and would welcome the opportunity to come back that date.
The chair will defer to that and direct staff to make that happen.
Great. Well, thank you.
All
right. Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize the executive director for his report.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And I'll be brief. I appreciate everybody hanging around as long as they have. I understand it's been a long meeting. But I do want to provide just a few updates related to projects and procurements. First of all, the Regional Transit Development Plan contract, again, was awarded by the board last month. We held the kickoff meeting with the consultant, Tyndale Oliver, on February 6th, and we will proceed with monthly project management meetings, with the next one being on March the 4th. One of the things I'm looking forward to related to that project is their submission of a public involvement plan at the end of February. I had a conversation with Commissioner Bellamy earlier this morning about the fact of public engagement being so important related to projects like this. So the public involvement plan will be the beginning of how we intend to conduct our community outreach throughout the 5-county area during the term of that project. The solicitation for our PD&E project related to the regional rapid transit system was issued on February 7th, and we actually conducted the pre-proposal meeting yesterday. Proposals for that are due on March 7th, and we are on track to bring a recommendation for award of a contract to the board at our April board meeting. Moving into recruitment, I'm happy to announce that we have selected candidates for both our Director of Commuter Services and Senior Accountant positions, and I look forward to getting the actual offer letters out to both of those individuals today. The Senior Planner position was posted on February 7th, and we will be moving forward next week with interviews for it. The next position that I intend to advertise will be for the Director of Communications. We'll post that next week. And then finally, the Principal Planner position will be posted during the upcoming weeks as we get closer to actually awarding a contract for PD&E and receiving the funds from FDOT. And then finally, related to funding, our FTA 5307 grant application was submitted on February 14th, and that is currently with the Department of Labor for a period of up to 30 days for their review, as well as any unions that happen to be in the region. We anticipate actually executing that grant within the coming weeks. Certainly, we would anticipate that happening no later than April 1st, but hopefully even prior to that. One of the items that we included in that application for funding was related to technology, and something that we want to do related to board meetings is to purchase some tablets, as opposed to printing board packets out and bringing them in for board members every month and to all the committees. We want to have some tablets available for everybody during the board meetings so people will be able to review the information electronically on the tablets. So we look forward to purchasing some of those in the coming weeks as well. And those are all the updates I have for everybody.
Thank you. Any questions for David? Thanks for that report. Any new or old business to come before the board? No other business. Meeting adjourned. Thank you. Good meeting. Contentious, but
Well, it was great discussion. It was, I mean, and everybody's very thoughtful about it.
good stuff.
Thank you,
my friend.
Yeah,
Only
excellent
thing,
job.
only thing I'm asking for, negotiating on is price, right? The only thing I'm asking them for, yeah.
See y'all later.
Take care.
Thanks.
Be safe.
Proposers for
She wants to keep
I want to go to Panama.
She wants to keep this.
I have to pay for it
So,
myself.
normally a negotiation.
I don't know what's going on in Panama, but
I
I'm,
have to write a personal check. It gripes me to no end.
I'm not in a position.
Is it an official, is it an official thing?
Oh, yeah.
So why?
I don't know why my EDC guys just makes me do that. It's
I don't
just-
know, I just,
know.
I'm looking at,
I mean,
the-
David
Yes,
said
I
to
was
negotiate.
talking,
I don't know what you're gonna, I mean.
Well,
looking at
let
their
me say
price
this.
right
I can put it on my
in
calendar
comparison to the others.
thing, but it's politically, you know, I don't want, no one else has to do that but me. Like,
Then
I
I
just
guess I
asked
call
Karen,
and say,
and hers is paid for
you know,
by her
maybe they
EDC.
decide, you know what, we're.
I'm going to go raise hell. That's, I'm going outside and I'm gonna tell my.
That's apparently unfair.
It is. I mean, I keep having to, I did the hotel on my own pocket. Yeah. No.
wow.
And, I guarantee you, all the other elected officials get paid for, but not me. So, it's a little bone I have.
Need to change county.
It's my EDC that we find, yeah.
See you.
All right, thanks a lot, John.
Hey.
Good to see you.
Tony, hey, how are you? Good to see you. Yes, yeah, I know. Never a dull moment with TBARTA. I did make it to McDill finally. Yeah, I took just a quick drive through, went over to the PX and the commissary. Yeah.
I'm all about the lake, man.
It's hard to not like palm trees, you know? Golly.
Let's get together.
Okay. Oh, neat. Yeah.
Oh, good. Well, there's my 130s coming in now.
That's great.
Yeah. Been like a pace.
a real base, right? Except for housing. But you're getting there,
Yeah.
right? You're
Yeah,
getting
we
there.
had the town hall meeting on that this.
Okay. I remember, yeah. In August, yeah. Okay.
Thanks for coming.
See you next month. Chili first. Last weekend. Yeah, last weekend. Yeah, just to review it, familiarize myself with it, all the talking points, just all of that. And preparation. Okay.
I just didn't want you to have one to my, or dinner with my
Hamilton will do that to you.
Well, I was sitting there thinking, I spent all day with Caitlin yesterday.
There you go. Good luck. Thank you.
You are my number one thing I'm doing.
Okay. Everybody tells me so.
All right, catch up soon.
Welcome to TBARTA.
Okay.
Are we off? I hope we're not streaming. What? What in the world? Yeah. Anyway. I don't think most are like this. And I don't want to say little, because little is from a value standpoint. It's a small contract. Yeah, but it's just everybody has their opinion. So we're navigating all that.
It's funny because a lot of them seem to agree with each other and disagree at the same time.
That's
It's confusing, I know. Yeah.
You know, I didn't disagree with General Counsel.
If I had to bet, I would say he's valid. He didn't say. I don't think he said.
Who are you talking to?
John did. I feel like he's valid. I think McLean said he's valid. Jim Fowler, Melon valid. And then you got all of the VA, you know, Janet, Karen, Starkey. I'm just cleaning. Over the third. Same with, I stacked this one. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah.
Sloppy, sloppy, sloppy.
Yeah, because they were first.
If pricing is that much of a factor, you know, then what's the discussion about? I'm just saying it's almost like $1,000. Right? So I'm not quite sure.
That's a great point, because based on the presentation, their qualifications, technical stuff, yeah, went through the roof.
Yeah.
And you add that into the price, and really, they should be the number one firm.
I wanted to ask Alan that, but I was like, what now?
He was tap dancing. Yeah, he
You know?
was.
And then my other thing is with just playing devil's advocate, think there's a total of 11, you have 11 voting members, possibly. At the next board meeting, the other two, Buckhorn and Manuel, they won't be allowed to vote on this because they didn't hear the presentation.
Good, procedural question. Yeah, that's. Leave a binder clip up there.
Oh, a giant one? I took it, yeah, I didn't do the one.
Yeah. He won't show up. He's leaving anyway. Yeah.
Okay, and.
Yeah, he's on his way out.
So, and then the other.